Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei Fell in Love with Female Izuku Midoriya Part 3. Before we start, please go support Anthony Tyler 9 for writing that awesome fanfic. Now let's begin. Kao makes his appearance. Izumi stood across from Issei as she dragged the seemingly dead form of Loki towards his father as the old man made a magic circle and sent the boy back to his home in Asgard. Odin gave her his condolences as he walked away, only for the meeting to be interrupted once again by another new face. "I am here to make sure that no peace treaty between the supernatural is ever conceived," the new face called out as Izumi stared at him closely. She seemed to recognize who he was based on his face alone, but was drawing blanks everywhere from her memory. Issei then moved forward as he stood in front of the man with an angered expression. "How many more people are going to interrupt the most important meeting between differing factions?" Issei growled out as the man before him stared at him in disbelief. "You hold a sacred gear, you wouldn't happen to be the Red Dragon of Domination, would you?" the man asked as Issei stared, growling angrily. "And what if I am, would that make you want to leave?" Issei challenged. "Excuse me language, but heavens no, I would merely try and recruit you into the heroes faction in order to show these supernatural freaks to not underestimate those with sacred gears," the man said as Issei stared at him completely bored. "I don't wish to leave the treaty that I had entered of my own free will. Not only that, but I am going to be a father really soon and I don't want there to be any fighting between the heroes faction and the supernatural. You can take your recruitment papers far away from me and my family," Issei retorted as the man introduced himself. "Well, my name is Kao and I am the leader of the heroes faction. And should you wish to leave the treaty of supernatural factions, I will make sure that you will have a place to stay within the place where the heroes reside," Kao said as Issei got into a fighting stance. "Don't think that I won't fight you in order to hold you off. Surziches alone could kill you in a single strike," Issei warned as Kao looked at the man himself. Surziches was merely looking annoyed at how there was another interruption to the treaty between supernatural factions. "Well, I guess I won't fight you then. There are way too many people who have powers stronger than me and I would like to live for another day. But if you wish to train your sacred gear a little further, then far be it from me to hold you back. My name is Kao once more and I will hope that you join the Chaos Brigade at some point in order to show the supernatural that humans are not to be underestimated," Kao said, disappearing with his spear. "Well, now that that is over, how about we go home and have some of my favorite cereal, Tooty Pebbles," Issei exclaimed before being punted out of the building by another foot. Izumi screamed as Issei disappeared off into the distance. Falling from the sky, Issei released his draconic wings as he floated down to the ground as Kao had made his return to the battlefield in front of him. "You know, I thought that you'd left already, so what gives?" Issei demanded as Kao looked at him. "Well, since you won't join me, I will have to kill you and find the new Red Dragon Emperor in order to get them to join me. I hope you will find it in your heart to forgive me," Kao mocked as he prepared his spear. "Issei, do not allow that spear to touch you. One touch and you will be dead once more and there would be nothing I can do in order to protect you," Drake warned. "Got it, Drake? Any ideas of how to keep that thing away as well as make sure to beat this guy?" Issei questioned as he launched at Kao. "Nothing much, but stay out of range from that spear, it was the one that killed Jesus Christ. And if it can kill the Son of God, then it can easily kill you," Drake informed as Issei nodded his head. "Alright, keep little spear away from me, check, keep him on the run, double check. Now, time to deal with the brat who wishes to deal with his alcoholic father," Issei quipped in his head. Issei moved about the battlefield as he dodges and weaves through the attacks of Kao and lands attacks of his own. He knows that all it takes is one well-placed stab and he is dead, and Izumi will not be capable of seeing him ever again and he won't be capable of watching his child grow to become a great dragon. Fighting as hard as he can, he watched the movements of Kao to try and predict his next movements, but something happens as he is fighting like this. For some reason he gains an ability to watch as his opponent's muscles and blood vessels are moving about to telegraph to him the attack that is about to happen. Not knowing what this means, he rolls with it as he goes for the attack and now places Kao on the back foot as Issei gains footing against him and pushes him back into the corner without entering balance breaker. "You're an excellent fighter, can I know who trained you?" Kao asked as they stopped for a breather. "A magician never tells his secrets," Issei said as he thought about the bullshit move he had just learned in the moment. "I will never tell Izumi about this new move that I just learned," he would celebrate to himself. Taking a deep breath, he steels himself for the worst of the fight as his opponent does the same as he gains a serious look on his face and suddenly disappears. And just as Kao was about to plunge his spear into Issei's back without him even noticing his presence behind himself, Issei gains a feeling of death being behind him and instinctively dodges to the right. As he moved to the right, he finds a spear coming from his left and it just missed him by a mere centimeter as he moves away from his opponent who just stood there looking shocked as to how Issei noticed him. Standing at full height, Cao makes a demand of Issei. You will enter you balance breaker and fight me at full power. If you lose, I will make sure that you are killed without any kind of pain. But if you win, I will leave you and your allies alone for the time being. Cao said, staring at Issei. What makes me think that you'd actually go through with your word? Most humans always have a second motive for such a deal. Issei asked as he stared at the spear. Drake, you think we could absorb that spear into the boosted gear? Issei asked, mentally. Partner, nobody has ever tried to absorb another sacred gear into the boosted gear. But if you must know, it is possible. But it will come at a great cost. Drake said as Issei looked at the boosted gear. What is the issue? Issei asked as he got into a fighting stance before getting ready to activate balance breaker. There is a high chance of your body not being capable of wielding the power of the true longinus. And you will die if it fails. Drake said, sternly. I guess I should make the impossible possible then. Issei thought to himself. Balance breaker, he called out, covering himself in sharp dense armor. He then turned to his opponent and launched as soon as he started to boost without his opponent knowing. They would clash in the sky as the ripples of their clashes were seen from afar. Many moves were made in order to make Cao want to throw his spear in the direction of Issei, and as soon as Issei had cornered him in an open area, he decided to withdraw from the area, but not before making a split decision that would cost him the weapon that he trained years with. True longinus Maniratana, Cao called as he threw his spear in the direction of Issei. Issei watched as Cao was ready to repel any attack that Issei would throw back at him, but then something that Issei did caused the leader of the hero's faction to stare in shock and horror. Alright, boosted gear absorbed the attack, as well as the spear into our own weapon, Issei called out as he placed his gem in the way at the last second, as the boosted gear began to pull the spear into the gem itself. As the power of the spear was beginning to become too much for Issei to handle, he decided to say bucket and absorb the power into his body and balance breaker form as he converted the damage he was taking from the strike and transform it into his boosted gear's power. As the spear was slowly pushing Issei across the open field, Issei watched as the spear slowly began to glow a green color as he was about to lose consciousness and saw that Cao was forced to retreat in a magic circle. Before fully passing out, Issei heard the words that he was wanting to hear from Drake the moment he made the plan come out in full form. True longinus. Completely absorbed boosted gear evolution sacred gear true longinus boosted gear, Drake called out happily. Return to the original world. Izumi was talking to Eri as she was sitting next to Izumi as Surziches conversed with Auden about the terms of their peace treaty. So what do you think will happen if we return to our homeworld with our new powers? Eri asked, drinking some tea. I have no idea. From what I remember as of right now, I am old enough to drink alcohol. But I don't wish to drink it since I will be seeing my hatchling come from their egg soon. It might take a small while before that happens though. Izumi said as she eats some cake. Rias had decided to come over to their table in order to see what they were talking about at the moment. When she arrived, Izumi had started to growl at her presence, which caused Eri to look at her with a glare that could kill her. Who said that you could come over near me and my hero? Eri asked angrily. I just wanted to know what my servant wanted with that filth of a dragon. I need to make sure that you don't turn against me after all. Rias said pompously. Well, we don't need to tell you about what we were talking about, Rias. Don't forget that I have a restraining order on you and your family barring Eri-chan. Izumi said, growling more now. It was here that Rias noticed the egg in Izumi's arms and she gained a smirk on her face as she sat down at the table and smarmily spoke to her. Are you going to eat that? I've heard that dragon eggs are a delicacy in the underworld here, didn't think you'd bring me one so happily. Rias said as Izumi stared at her, anger slowly rising. It was then everyone in the room heard a crack and Izumi looked down at her own egg only to find it missing from her grip and looked over to find Rias and her broken egg being consumed by the young woman with a smug look on her face. In the middle of the universe, a new portal was slowly appearing in the void in between the realms as a giant red dragon looked on in amusement. It appears that it is now time to return the girls back to their old world. I believe that the transformative one needs to remain here until they complete a task worthy of a hero. The dragon said as he began to will the girls in the devil party to his location to send them back. Back at the party, nothing was able to be heard and Izumi was staring at Rias with a shocked and horrified expression as the girls stared at her with a winning expression on her face. Izumi's face slowly became enraged as she stood up slowly from the table as Surziches noticed the girl's rage from where he was and moved to stop what was happening until he saw the egg that he knew was Izumi's. Oh no. Surziches said as he sighed with sadness. What is wrong? Auden asked. My little sister has just ended her own life. Surziches said as there was nothing he could do now to stop Izumi from tearing the girl limb from limb. Looking over at the scene, Auden noticed that Izumi's egg was destroyed as it was in the process of being eaten by the pompous little girl. Walking over to Izumi, he placed his hand on her shoulder as she stared at him with tears in her eyes. As he shook his head at her, Izumi stared at Rias as the woman thought that she was safe from anything here. Izumi then walked over and grabbed her throat and lifted the young heiress from the ground as she started to choke. First you demand that I give you my mate. Then you decide that you want me dead for taking a potential piece from you, and now you finally take something that I had, something that I could replace from my own world. I hope that you are bucked senseless by that bastard riser and turned into a pocket hussy worthy of all the lower class devils in the underworld. Izumi growled angrily, tearing up from the loss of her hatchling. Izumi then gripped tighter in her hand as she threw the woman into the wall on the other side of the room when both her and Eri suddenly disappeared from the party. Get me the coordinates of the two girls. We need to find out where they were being sent in order to make sure that the Red Dragon Emperor doesn't fall into the dragon's curse. Surziches called out to all devils in the party. As soon as everyone started to move about the place, Surziches looked to Auden as the man was looking sadly at the broken egg. I think that you should finally place your sister behind bars. She has gone too far by eating the unborn child of a mother in front of Izumi. If you wish to keep your relations with the dragons, this is the only way for you to save face. Auden said as he walked over to the man before continuing. I will sign your peace treaty, but you must get a better control over your men. Then the old man left the room, leaving a very distraught Issei who just arrived in the location. Where is Izumi and my hatchling? Issei called out angrily. It was just as he arrived that he was suddenly taken away by the same exact thing that took Izumi and Eri. What the fu, Surziches said before we transition to the dimensional gap. In the dimensional gap, the giant dragon could be seen with Izumi, Eri and Issei now appearing next to him as he stared at them in the portal. It is time for you to return to your old world with Issei Hyoudou coming with you. This world is no longer safe with you in it. You will be hunted down here until you are dead, and that is not alright with me. You were a visitor here and you were treated like animals. You will head back to your old home and bring the Red Dragon Emperor with you. The dragon said as Izumi started to shiver in both pain as well as loss. Izumi, Eri-chan, what happened to our hatchling? Issei called out, floating to Izumi. SS, she's gone. Izumi said as tears were now flowing down her face. What do you mean that she's gone? Issei asked, tearing up as well. That bitch Ria's Gremory. As she took my egg without me noticing and cracked it open and ate our baby in front of me, Izumi wailed as she hugged Issei to her body. Unknown to them, Eri was looking at them with anger as well as sadness, as she couldn't believe that her master was able to do that in front of her hero like that. I'm going to kill that bitch when I get my hands on her when I see her next. Issei growled as they looked at the giant dragon next to them. Come on, I don't have all day or week. I need you to enter this portal before it closes once more. After this portal closes there will be no going back. Not until I call upon you once more, Issei Hyoudou. The giant dragon said, smirking at them. As they all floated over to the portal, Izumi looked back to the dragon with two last questions on her mind. Who are you, and will we remain our same ages? Izumi asked, curious. You will return to your original age for when you enter this portal, but at the same time Issei will have his powers the same as when he trained here. Well, you will have at least 15% more control over your quirk, making your usage of one for all 55% capable of being used. The giant dragon said as he smirked at them before stating. I will tell you of my name at a later date, young hatchling. The dragon said before everything went quiet. Nodding her head, Izumi looked over to Issei before telling him about their plan to inform everyone that she knows about her time in his world. 3 minutes before Izumi, Eri and Himiko were taken away into a portal. Izumi Ichako screamed as she ran over to where Izumi, Eri and Himiko were leaving via Kurogiri's portal. As soon as she missed the portal closing, she fell onto the ground as she wailed out loud for the loss of her best friend. I, as she screamed in agony as she slammed her fists onto the ground before she slumped over. Problem child? Izawa Shoda asked as he walked over to Ichako. But just as he made it over to the girl, another portal appeared before the two as they looked up to find Eri, Izumi and a new boy falling out of it as if they were thrown. Hey, don't throw us out of there like that, the boy called out. Izumi Ichako called out, happily tearing up. Ichako, Izumi screamed as she ran over to Ichako. Hugging the other, Izawa walked over to the young man as he placed a hand on his shoulder. Turning around, the young man looked at Izawa. What is your name as well as age? Izawa asked, concerned. My name is Issei Hyoudou, and I am the Red Dragon Emperor. Issei said as Izawa looked over at Izumi. What happened to make her appear out of a portal like that? He demanded as Issei grimaced. This was going to be a long night for him and Izumi as they tell him about their time in his world, not to mention the trauma that was still going to plague Izumi over the coming weeks. 3 hours later, Izumi, Eri and Issei were walking towards the school grounds of UA Academy as they were preparing for the next fight against Shigaraki. They had recently heard over the radio that the transport vehicle for Overhaul was taken out as the man was left without his hands before he was found and taken to Tartarus prison. Issei was seen hugging Izumi close to him as Ochako stared at him in confusion as well as caution. This man was hugging Izumi like he was her significant other, and she was hoping that this man wasn't her boyfriend at the moment since he was seemingly groping her chest at the moment. Izumi, what happened to you? I just saw you get taken into a portal from Kurogiri and now you come back minutes later after the fact. What happened? Ochako asked as everyone else had looked on in shock. Bakugo was standing off to the side as Todoroki was standing next to him as they looked at the scene in front of themselves. The place I come from is where Ice comes from, it is his version of our world. But with a different set of government as well as powers. Izumi said as she snuggled into Issei's arms. She was still reeling from the death of her child by Rias and she didn't want to leave Issei's side for even a moment. The class also heard from Issei that Izumi was now completely a dragon, so they had to deal with the fact that their classmate was not only in possession of a dragon quirk but also had a seemingly boyfriend at the moment. How does that bastard get one of the best chicks in our class? Mineta called out, crying blood from his eyes. Maybe it's because that you're a hopeless pervert that doesn't know when to stop. Sayu said, slapping the boy with her tongue. Funny you should say that. Issei said, stuttering. Izumi, who is Hyoudou cunt to you? Todoroki asked. Issei is my mate, Izumi said, happily as Bakugo exploded. Don't tell me that this skinny buck is your boyfriend. I thought you were looking for someone who is strong like icy hot over here, Bakugo yelled. Well, sorry for telling you this, Bakago, Ice can probably defeat you without even going to his full power at the moment. Izumi said as she glared at the boy with hatred. Well, if you're so confident, how about we test that theory? Katsuki said as he glared at Issei, who had stood up. Izumi, I will make sure that you are taken to bed and I will not fight someone who looks like he is suffering from an inferiority and superiority complex. As much as putting his ego in check may sound, I will need to keep you company until your mind is finished coping with your loss. Issei said, picking the girl up in a princess carry. Beep, she screeched in surprise as he took her to her dorm. When he entered the elevator, everyone erupted in laughter as well as concern as Bakugo had just decided to take the stairs in order to get his fight like he wanted. How much you want to bet that he gets his ass beat? Kaminari asked curiously. Dude, don't say that. But I will bet 20 yen that he will win, Kirishima said, laughing. As the group devolved into hushed talk about Issei, Todoroki and Ochako walked up the stairs in order to make sure that Bakugo doesn't step where he doesn't belong. Arriving at the dorms where Izumi was taken to, they found Bakugo banging on the door demanding a fight with Issei as they ran over to him. Once closer, they heard that Izumi screamed at Bakugo to leave her alone with her boyfriend so that she can cope with the loss she felt not even a day ago. But Bakugo wasn't having it, he will get his fight even if it kills him. And as soon as he was about to bang on the door once again, the door suddenly opened up and Ochako found herself staring at Issei, glaring at Bakugo with hatred as he grabbed the boy's neck as he walked out of the room. Moving closer, they found Izumi sitting on her bed crying, and as they looked at Issei, he nodded at them before taking his glare back to Bakugo. As soon as they heard the door to the stairs close, they entered the room to find Izumi in a corner, hugging her knees to her chest as she cried sadly in a corner. Izumi, what is wrong? Did something happen in that other world? Todoroki asked, concerned. JJ, just some bitch killed my hatchling. Izumi said, through muffled sobs. What happened? Ochako asked, rubbing the girl's back. This high-class devil woman. Her name was Rias Gremory and she for some reason hated my guts for trying to keep Issei safe from her. I knew her reasons for allowing Issei to die against a fallen angel named Raynare was for her to gain a good fighter for her peerage. Not only that, sob, she had tried to kill me over 20 times in that world. And it all culminated in her breaking the egg where my hatchling was forming in and eating her in front of me. Izumi cried as she pulled Ochako close to her and cried in her chest. Ochako, being the kind and caring friend she was, pulled Izumi close to her as she rubbed her hair as Shoto had decided to keep her warm with his fire. While that was happening, Issei was walking towards the school with Bakugo tailing him as the young man ran towards the main building. Partner, where are we even going? Do you even know where the principal is? Drake asked, concerned. Nope, but I will make sure that this guy leaves me and Izumi alone until she is capable of working like a diligent student here once more. But I need to make sure that Bakugo leaves us alone first, so I will need to talk to Principal Nezu in order to get our jockey off my back. Issei said as he entered the school building. He had a head start against the blonde-haired menace as he ran over to the woman at the front desk. Hello there, how are you doing, sir? The woman asked. My name is Issei Hyoudou and can I talk to Principal Nezu really quick? Issei asked. Are you the boy that Nezu said could stay with Midoriya? The woman asked. Yes, can I talk to the rat really quick? Issei asked urgently. State your business with him first, then I will call him over. She said as she watched as Issei's face became a little angered. I need to make sure that he can get Bakugo to get off mine and her backs in order to help her deal with the fact that she lost a child, Issei growled at the woman accidentally. She lost her child, what happened, she asked worriedly. A woman from my world broke her egg and then ate the being inside just to prove a point. Issei said, deadpanning. The woman in front of him gained a shocked look on her face as she told him right then and there to head up the hall and up the stairs to the 4th floor, and it would be the door on the left once he reached there. As soon as he arrived at the door moments later, he found himself standing in front of an empty space as the door opened for him. Ah, Hyoudou-kun, I have been waiting for your arrival, what can I help you with today? Nezu, the smartest being on the planet, asked with his beady little eyes. Can you get your Pomeranian dog to leave me and Izumi alone for a week or two? He has been badgering me and her non-stop for hours since we have arrived to fight me because she told him that I could defeat him without going full power. Issei said as Nezu gained a curious look. How do you say she knew this? Nezu asked. Well, in my world there is a group of creatures that belong to the Bible and all mythology. Issei said as Nezu gained a glint in his eyes that demanded more information. Well, let's see what I can do for you. Nezu said as he pulled out his phone looking over a singular contact that had a familiar face on it. Supernatural powers fighting Bakugo. Bakugo stood in the middle of an arena as Issei stood across from the boy. Bakugo was very angry at the fact that this guy seems to think that he knows what the hell Izumi has been through in her entire life. But that doesn't matter, he will make the bitch look back at him like she used to, and he will eventually make sure that she can't ever leave his side. Just because he wasn't sexually attracted to her, he really liked her presence as he appreciated how she was on his side all the time, no matter the cause. For Issei, he has no reason to fight this guy. In this world he would essentially be called quirkless like Izumi was before gaining a quirk from her hero idol. He stood across from Bakugo as he kept an eye on his battle stance. The boy may be tough looking, but in terms of fighting potential, that would have yet to be seen. He has fought people with flaming powers before Riser, and he will not be against the idea of getting more experience in fighting them. So Bakugo waited as he sparked his quirk as his hand started to sparkle with small miniature explosions as the buzzer was heard and both fighters were off. Kitsuki launched a devastating right hook with an explosion at the ready when his hand hit hardcore metal. Using his explosion to increase the damage output, he accidentally made a smokescreen blocking his view of his opponent. Using his other hand to blast the smoke away, he found his opponent nowhere to be seen. Looking around, he tried to use his battle sense in order to find his opponent. Only to be kicked from behind and sent to the floor as Issei pressed his advantage of the element of surprise. Issei sent a left punch towards the downed Bakugo as the boy managed to turn around to find a metal-clawed hand in a punching form heading for his face. Catching the blow with one hand, he tried to blast Issei's face with an explosion to gain distance, but his wrist was in a grip that he couldn't pull from. He was pulled into a knee into his gut as he was tossed into the air as he was kicked in the upper torso, sending him flying towards a building. Bouncing off of the wall like a bouncy ball, Bakugo used this bounce to boost himself towards his opponent. Changing trajectory at the last second to blast Issei's back, he changed his tactics in order to blast Issei until he couldn't stand anymore. What he wasn't prepared for was a metal-clawed hand fast approaching him from an angle he couldn't understand as his left leg was grabbed by the ankle. He was promptly slammed into the ground multiple times as he taunted the boy. You really think that you could get away with bullying your oldest friend since childhood, huh? Well, if you think that you can do the same to me and get away without a fight, then you will get at least half of my quirkless strength, Issei taunted as he slammed the boy into the ground one more time before kicking him across the field. Watching from afar, Izumi and Ichako were watching the fight with a shock and awed expression on their faces. Izumi was in awe of how Issei was able to battle Kitsuki without seeming to be panting heavily, but she did notice that he was slowly getting angrier and angrier at Kitsuki. Ichako was in shock at how one of their strongest classmates was being sent flying around the arena like a ragdoll, not their teacher, but a literal ragdoll. The other classmates of theirs were surprised by his strength as well, but it wasn't until Mina spoke up about something that Izumi started to growl. You think he is single? I bet he is great in bed. As everyone heard the growling in the room, Class 1 Anazawa and Nezu plus All Might, they all looked towards Ichako and Izumi as they saw Izumi with a growling look on her face. Hey, are you alright, young Midoriya? All Might asked as he kneeled towards the young girl. Izumi stopped growling as she saw her mentor in front of her. She shook her head as the man held her close to himself as he calmed her down. That was until they heard an explosion of power as they heard Kitsuki scream out his win against Issei. Kitsuki was collecting a lot more nitroglycerin than he had been thinking. This fight was taking longer than he thought it would, and this quirkless buck was actually proving to him that his strength is stronger than his. He was feeling threatened by this guy as he pulled out his grenadier support gear that was on his left arm. Pointing it at Issei, he started to grin wildly. If you think that you can survive this, then you are deemed worthy of Izumi's time, Kitsuki screamed as he blasted the support gear at Issei. Issei took the taunt well as he stood ramrod still as the blast came closer and closer to him until it engulfed him inside the smoke, debris, and flames. As the blast came all the way through the street and blasting windows to smithereens, Kitsuki started to laugh hysterically as he thought he won. "Take that, you quirkless bastard, there's no way you could tank that attack. I win this fight," Kitsuki screamed as he watched the smoke and debris clear up a little. It wasn't until he noticed a small red ball of energy show around the smoke that he realized that this wasn't the end of the fight. Picking up his guard, he watched as the ball of energy grew until it was large enough to blast him to nothing. Before he heard the extra speak. "If you think you can survive this, tank the blast. But I know that you will die if this even touches you, so you better dodge this attack," Issei said calmly as he blasted Bakugo. Bakugo, being the battle-ready bastard that he was, pulled out his other support item as he released the pin for that as it headed for Issei's beam. There was a minuscule battle for supremacy until the explosion was overpowered and the beam shot through the smoke and Kitsuki saw his life flash before his eyes and he dodged to the left. He would watch as the blast continued in the distance for Mount Fuji in the distance behind UA and he would watch as a large explosion would occur. As soon as the smoke cleared from the mountain, everyone saw the raw power of Issei as it was reduced to nothing but a small plateau. Looking back to Issei, Kitsuki saw that Issei wasn't even breathing heavily at the moment. That amount of raw power showed him that there was nothing he could do to catch up. As soon as Issei called off the fight, Kitsuki ran up to him as he stood in front of the young man. "What is it now?" Issei asked, a little irritated. "I am going to be your rival. And there is nothing you can do about it. I will train until I can defeat you," Kitsuki said as he walked off. "Well, if you wish to do that, learn how to properly fight," Issei said as he walked over to the room where everyone was waiting. Upon entering the room, Issei saw that Izumi was in a horrible mood but was slowly calming down because of the walking skeleton that was giving her a hug. "Hey, so you must be All Might, right?" Issei asked as the man turned to look at him. "Yes, I am. It's nice to meet you, young Hyoudou. Anything I can do for you?" he asked as he watched the young man's every move. "Can I get my girlfriend back, please? I noticed that she is very angry and if she isn't calmed down by me alone, then she might go on a rampage," Issei said as All Might looked at her. "Is what he is saying true, young Midoriya?" All Might asked, a little hurt. "Why, yeah, he was the only person in that other world who could calm me down in his D dimension," Izumi said as she looked to Issei. "Make sure that you don't do anything that risks danger and keep it in your pants, young man," All Might said before getting ready to leave. You probably are a bit late for that, All Might sensei," Izumi said as All Might looked back at her. "What do you mean?" All Might asked worriedly. Well, I've already been pregnant in his world," Izumi said a little more quietly. "If you were pregnant, where is the baby?" Shoto asked, confused. "Ria's Gremory killed her. We were at a gala in the underworld back in my dimension and she cracked the egg open and ate the child within," Issei said, slowly reining in his anger. I'm sorry to hear that, young Midoriya. Just please, be sure that you make sure to tell one of us if you're pregnant again," All Might said as he left the room with a horrified face. Same for the rest of the class except for Ichako as she stood near Izumi. "Are you alright, Izumi?" Issei asked, pulling the girl towards his chest. "Not completely. Mina asked if you were single or if you were good in bed and I got angry," implicit and bemeted Mizumi said, devolving into a muttering spree. She was interrupted by his hand pulling her into his chest as she took in his scent, especially since she was still a dragon, her scent was massively better than a sensory quirk. As she took in Issei's scent, she calmed down immediately as Ichako stared at the scene as if she was interrupting something. "If you want to enter this hug, then you can," Issei said as Ichako slowly but surely helped Izumi calm down from her anger and sadness. "For what it's worth, I believe that Bakugo was a hick. Same for that Gremory girl," Ichako said as she pulled Izumi into her own hug, separating her from Issei. Izumi soon fell asleep in their arms as Issei looked at Ichako and gained a mischievous smirk on his face now that Izumi was asleep. "You know, if it wasn't for my good looks, I would have thought that you were crushing on Izumi or me," he said as Ichako immediately gained a massive blush on her face as she placed her hands over her face, causing her to indirectly activate her quirk and send her floating across the room. Black whip came out of Izumi as she pulled Ichako from the ceiling and back on the ground as the girl released herself from her own quirk's effects. They were leaving the room when they noticed that they were missing someone. "Where is Himiko Toga?" Izumi screamed as she remembered that the girl was now locked in Issei's dimension. Back within the realm of the underworld, a young woman was seen collecting the blood of her enemies that were strewn about the area. She had blonde hair and they were in a style of buns on both sides of her head as she grinned with pleasure on her face. "I can't believe that there is so much blood here. I can't wait to see when I can make the strongest beings here bleed, ha 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 ha," We look around her as there were many angels, fallen angel, and devil bodies strewn about as they gargled on their blood that was leaving their bodies. But there was one person who was hiding from the girl, and she had tan-colored hair, somewhat like sand as she held her hand over her mouth. She had watched the girl kill each and every one of her allies, and she had to escape from there in order to make it back to heaven to inform Michael about the problem of a girl with a shape-shifting power. Little did she know that the girl who she was hiding from had known she was there and saw her fly away. She might bring someone who will love me. I can't wait to meet them. I wonder how Jin and the League are doing though. Himiko Toga wondered as she just decided to place that thought at the back of her mind, and she skipped away searching for a new prey for her to assimilate. Himiko Toga vs Asmodeus. Toga was seen walking amongst the cities of the underworld. She had been searching for her allies for a long while since coming here. She did really like the blood-red skies as well as the purple sun though, it really meshed with her love of blood. She was searching for her next victim of collecting blood, and she had been able to use the form of some others that she took the blood from in order to fool some of their allies, in order to kill them, as well as go after some of the people from their own homes. She was all alone on the streets as she came across a man with black hair that cascaded down his lower back as he stared at her with a leer of anger. He had blackish gray eyes that looked at her like she was a mirror and compared to him, and as he walked closer to her, he decided to be a complete pervert and groped her ass as he stared at her eyes. Nice to see a human within the realm of devils. What brings you down here, little girl? He asked, leering at her body. My name is Himiko Toga. And I would appreciate it if you would stop groping my chest. Himiko said, stabbing the devil in his gut. Ga Kurogiri called out angrily as he moved away from Himiko. He flew into the sky as he charged some blasts in Himiko's direction when he noticed that her presence in the area was gone. What the? Where did she go? He called out angrily. Looking in all directions, he searched for the energy that all humans possess as she slowly closed in from behind him. Pulling out a knife from her back pocket, she was literally behind the devil as she placed the knife on his neck, causing the man to still in her arms. What the H? How did you get behind me? Kurogiri called out, stunned. I am Himiko Toga, a vampire from another world. I don't know what this world is called, but I will let you know something. The power I possess isn't that of a supernatural power possessed in this world. She said, whispering it into the man's ear. Getting more and more angry, he lets out his power as she is sent flying with a whee as she lands on the ground looking towards her opponent. I will not be humiliated by a human piece of trash, he called out, charging his blasts in her direction. If he could see her, then her erasure of her presence wouldn't be able to work, and as soon as he felt her presence disappear, he fired his blast at her. There was an explosion on the ground, alerting all those within his area that there was a fight happening near the familiar forest. Himiko hid behind a tree as she thought about how to fight this kind of opponent. He was a leering bastard, but at the same time he looked like he could use some blood on him to make him more beautiful and cuter. So pulling out a knife she had stolen from one of the weird angels that attacked her with it a few weeks ago and looked at its silver design. It was a long blade that was silver in color and ended with a point at the end. There was a singular part that was circular and that was just above the handle. Looking closely, she noticed the magic sigil on it that closely resembled the Bible from her world, and she smirked to herself as soon as she saw it. If he is a devil, then I wonder what would happen if he was stabbed multiple times with a blade like this. Himiko thought to herself as she moved around the forest in order to catch her new prey off guard. Call Kurogiri, Asmodeus now, since I can't continue writing that name anymore. Asmodeus was floating in the sky as he watched all around him to make sure that his little attacker wasn't going to come out and catch him off guard again. Fool me once, that is just a coincidence. Fool me twice, then that means I am getting weaker. That was what he was thinking at the moment as he focused on his task of finding Himiko. She could be anywhere within this forest, and he wouldn't lose her in here. It had been a few weeks since the death of Leviathan, and she was his wife. He couldn't live without having a personal humbucket, and if this girl could satisfy him, then he could make her into his own. Maybe even impregnate her as well. That would be a good time. He would cherish her screams of agony, as well as pleas for help when it would appear that nobody would come for her. He could hear it now, although there was a weird screaming coming from below him, and he should probably check on that. Landing on the ground where the screaming came from, he looked around his area and searched for the power she had. Weak as it may be, she had managed to land hits not many devils and Satan-class beings could be capable of. He walked through the forest as he kept an eye on his peripherals, just to be sure that Himiko couldn't come at him from a blind spot. It was quite too quiet. But just as he noticed an ominous presence near him, it was already too late, as his left hip was stabbed by a blaze that burned him from the inside out. Asmodeus screamed in pain as he grabbed his hip, making sure to heal it as much as possible. Looking behind himself, he found Toga standing there with a smile on her face, but it was just so wrong. She had a crazed smile on her face as her hands were bloody with his blood. She stared at him with blush marks on her face as she licked his blood. Don't get him wrong, he loves kinky women, but this is too much. What are you doing? Why are you drinking my blood? Asmadia said, looking at Himiko. She looked at him with a smile. That dastardly smile that placed a small bit of fear into him as slowly she transformed into him. Hi-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha, Toga laughed to her heart's content. You think that amount of power could kill me? She laughed even harder as Asmodius charged a new blast of energy at her. But with all the burning happening in his body, he couldn't charge it any further and blasted the double of himself. I can't believe that I thought that you'd be cuter with more blood on you. I would rather Deku-kun be all bloody than you. Toga said as she moved faster than Asmodius could see. Landing behind him, she stood as tall as him as she spoke to him without looking behind herself to see his reaction. You know, this power is too little against that crimson-haired devil king. If you attacked him with this kind of pitiful power, he would annihilate you without a second thought. I can't believe that I was even able to see him and that he could sense me when I found him. Himiko said as she became hard-eyed as she spoke about the Crimson Satan. What are you talking about? Are you talking about Surzich's Lucifer? Asmodius called out, fearfully. Huh? Yes, I am. Do you know how he gets his hair to look like blood exactly? Himiko asked, curiously. She was now in Asmodius's face as he was now blushing up a storm at how close she was to him, and he looked into her face and smirked. I don't know how he gets his hair to look like blood, but I do know that it is a family trait. The Gremory clan has blood-red hair and they pass it on to their children because of their overwhelming power over destruction. Asmodius said as he gave Himiko some knowledge on the Gremory family. Who do you think could I get the blood from? Himiko asked, staring into his eyes, still holding the knife behind her back. Check Kuo town, there should be a devil presence there. She was last seen in that town before coming back down into the underworld due to some problems on the surface. Asmodius said before he felt something stab into his chest as he coughed up blood. Looking down, he found the silver blade that was used to stab into his hip, now embedded into his chest. Looking at the girl in front of him, he placed his hand over her chest and blasted her with all the remaining power he held within his body. As soon as the blast came out of Himiko's chest and out of her upper back, no hole in sight, Asmodius had fell onto the ground behind her as his body convulsed as he slowly turned to ashes. Himiko looked at the ashes of the man behind her and she only thought of only one thing. I couldn't have killed him that easily with this blade, could I? Renewed life. Problematic old loves. Izumi was waking up from her sleep when she felt someone get handsy on her body. Moaning a little, she got up only to be face to face to a little great bastard who was feeling her up. He took one picture of her before she grabbed his phone and crushed it underneath her fist. The little bastard had the gall to call her out on being a slut, but she told him that he felt her up and that she was living with a perverted mastermind who knows all her kind of likes and dislikes. It didn't end well when Izumi had told the teacher as the man finally had the evidence against him to kick him out of the school, and the girls there finally had a moment of reprieve from him. Kitsuki entered the kitchen to find Izumi fuming at the kitchen countertop as he opened the fridge. So what did the little bastard do this time? Surely it wasn't anything too bad. Kitsuki said, gathering some ingredients to make himself some coffee. Mineta finally got expelled for his sexual behavior towards the girls. He was in my room this morning feeling my chest up while I was waking up. Izumi said as Kitsuki stared at her before nodding his head. Figured that little bastard would do something bad enough to warrant getting kicked out eventually. Never thought he'd go after you though. Kitsuki said, sitting down at the table. What do you think that he would do to you if you were a girl? Izumi asked as Kitsuki looked at her funny. I wouldn't even be in the same class as that bastard. Hell, I would have killed him many times over if I was a girl. Kitsuki said as everyone agreed with him. Well, we have the day off since the problem happened this morning. So what do we do? Izumi asked her classmates. She couldn't cuddle with Issei since the young man was talking to Detective Tsukauchi about the world he came from and telling the police force about the supernatural world over in the reality he came from. Izumi was about to sit down and have a nice calm day without any problems, but before she could even sit down, Kitsuki grabbed her, harshly by the way, and told her that they'd be training together. Sighing in defeat, she left with him as she went all the way to the gym where they trained together a lot. Izumi and Kitsuki were sparring with one another, throwing punch and kicks at the other as they talked about their lives up till this point. Izumi had even told Kitsuki about her life in the other world with Issei, and Kitsuki started to get a little pissed in their sparring. Are you going to take me seriously or not? Kitsuki asked, suddenly as Izumi stared at him with a light sweat happening on her face and arms. What are you talking about? I have been serious this entire time, Izumi said, as Kitsuki shook his head. Not human version of going all out, the supernatural form of going all out. I want to see how much stronger you got in that other world you were in and took the time to try and have a kid inside of. Kitsuki said, as Izumi revealed her draconic aura. It was emerald green as Kitsuki grinned as he was getting what he was looking for until Izumi turned the aura off. What the hell, I wanted to fight you at your best, Katsuki growled out. If I went full power in that form you would be a paste of blood on the ground, do you not have common sense? Izumi growled back. I have common sense, you are just on the side of that bastard who came here saying that he's your boyfriend. You are supposed to not have anyone like you like that, Katsuki cried out as his face became red with fury. I'm not supposed to find love of my own. What the hell are you talking about, Kaken? I can find love myself if I put myself out there to receive it, Izumi said as they moved back away from the other. Izumi had a look of shock as well as disgust on her face at her old friend's words, but Katsuki had a face of fury. Izumi wasn't supposed to find love in another world, even if the man was a bastard and perverted slightly. All your life you were quirkless, you were supposed to be underneath me in terms of strength and power. I held all the power, the intelligence, as well as many other things. You were supposed to be the loveless, powerless, worthless, waste of space deku. You were supposed to die the day I told you to, Katsuki finally screamed out as Izumi stared at him with horror on her face. Katsuki had the gall to smile at her as well when he saw her look at him, to think that her old friend never cared for her like she did for him. Did he even care for her when they were kids? She needed to know. Kaken, did you even care for me when we were kids? Izumi asked, concerned. Of course not, you were a blemish on my record of becoming the next #1 hero. Not only that, but I would have came back for you once I attained that status and claimed you for myself, Katsuki said as he glared into Izumi's eyes. Izumi had stared at him for a while now. She wasn't giving him a look of admiration anymore like she usually did, she gave him a disgusted look at him as if she hated him. I never should have saved you from All for One and the League of Villains, Izumi said as she left the training facility. When she left the facility, Katsuki felt something break in his heart when that was stated. Did she really leave him with words like that? He was going to come back to her and claim her as his once he became the best hero. He wouldn't have this, he would make that deku pay. Over the next week of living in the dorms, Izumi would be having problematic fights with Katsuki all over the school grounds. He would demand to fight her during classes, and it was really showing what was happening between them as their anger was slowly coming to the surface during the fights. Even All Might was getting worried as he watched Izumi, his successor, get angered slowly but surely by the amount of times Katsuki called for a rematch. It eventually became too much for the girl to handle all her anger as one day during their rematch of the 75th variety, she landed a blow that pierced through his stomach. All Might had seen her eyes become dull in that moment before the strike happened and immediately left the room and went to both her and Bakugo's aid. Arriving on the scene, he found Izumi staring at the mess on the ground as Bakugo was groaning in pain as blood poured out of his torso. The medical bots immediately took him to the nurse's office as he was running out of blood fast, but that wasn't what All Might was worried about. Izumi's face was that of calm serene, but overall, she was distraught at having nearly killed one of her classmates, but over everything else her oldest friend, even though she shouldn't think of him like that anymore. He took her out of the classroom in order to make sure that she could wash all the blood away from her body, as well as hands, even helping her with some of it in her hair, as she seemed to forget about it entirely. All Might sensei, am I a bad person? Izumi asked as tears were coming down her face. I don't know about that, young Midoriya. The world you came from was a dangerous one that had you kill in order to protect yourself. You aren't a bad person, young Midoriya, just that you need to be directed back onto the path of heroism once more. And that is a job for the former symbol of peace, All Might said as he buffed up and then transformed back into his Yogi form. She hugged him as he did the same back to her. She had dealt with so much in her time as a young girl, and he would make sure that she is kept on the side of heroism, even if it kills him. All Might was walking towards Nezu's office. He needed to talk to the rat about what Katsuki had been doing, and it was seriously getting on his nerves how the young boy hasn't even been reprimanded for everything yet. Before he could knock on the door to the room, he doesn't have enough time to say anything before it opens up for him. Hello, All Might, come in, Nezu's squeaky voice called out as the old hero entered the office. It's been a long time since we had our tea, would you like some? Nezu asked. I came here for an update on Bakugo, sir. He has annoyed my successor for the last time. And he got severely injured for it. I hope you have something planned to prevent this kind of thing from happening ever again. All Might said as Nezu stared at him. What about young Bakugo? Nezu asked as he was confused, and All Might decided to show him everything that Bakugo had done since the beginning of the year. That is seriously trying, but we need to know from Izumi herself about what has been happening. Nezu said as All Might then placed a recorder in front of the animal. All Might, can we please do something about Kaken? He has been annoying me a lot lately and I can't seem to get him to leave me alone. He said too many cruel things to me while sparring the other day and I don't wish to speak to him anymore. Izumi said, distressed in her wording and tone. What has he been doing to you lately, young Midoriya? All Might asked in the recording. He has called me names as well as attacked me for no reason all week. book, he even tried to call me a slut during training over the attire I used during the exercise the other day, Izumi said, as All Might in the recording got concerned. What else has he said to you? He asked. He told me that I should have taken his advice almost 2 years ago back at school during junior high. Izumi said, gulping from the looks of the recording. He told me to kill myself 2 years ago before you saved me from the sludge villain. Please don't blame yourself, because it was after that you told me that I couldn't be a hero that I really started to consider doing what he said. Izumi said, seemingly ashamed of herself. That is all the evidence I need in order to place the young man in prison, Nezu. We need to do something about this toxic relationship both have with one another. Because when push comes to shove, my successor will have her first kill here, all because that young man will not leave her alone physically and mentally, All Might urgently said, as the old hero stared at the rat. Well, I can always send him to Tartarus for what he said to her that day alone. But overall it seems like he will need to be placed in the hands of the Ketsubutsu High School. They have a villainous rehabilitation program that we just do not have implemented at the time, since the higher-ups don't wish for villains to be amongst our students. Nezu said, sighing. I will bring Tsukauchi in order to make sure that everything is ringed as true. I know my student and successor. She will never lie about anything. All Might said, as he left the rat to himself. Now then, time to see which schools he was in to take down. I know that this will do little in making our relationship better, but she needs to know that she can trust us as heroes and people who can help her. Nezu said, as he looked for every single school Izumi Midoriya went to in her past. Itsuki has problems. Itsuki has been on Izumi's ass since the start of the second semester of school, and he hasn't left her alone since then. He was forced to take some remedial lessons in order to tone down his anger, and the culture festival was coming up soon. Izumi and Issei had been spending their time together at every point of the day, and Katsuki was getting jealous of how she wasn't looking at him in admiration anymore. She only stared at him in both fear as well as anger, but there was a new emotion there on her face whenever she stared at him: disappointment. Katsuki had been talking to Kirishima about how he can tone down his anger issues, and the boy had been telling him to talk to Hound Dog about it since he is a licensed therapist. After talking to the hero about his problems about Izumi and how she doesn't look at him in admiration anymore, the hero told him to just let her go. If she doesn't wish to look at him like that anymore, that is her decision. She doesn't need to be shackled by his presence anymore, and if anything, it is making her progress as a person lose its weight. He knew that everything he did to her in the past was wrong, he knows it, and the teachers back in middle school hadn't done a thing about it until now. He was faced with so many challenges since coming here, and he can't help but feel like he was to blame for Izumi not wishing to be near him in the past. He had made fun of her for years, even talking shit about how her mother dying on her was to get away from her. He never felt prouder of the girl for sending him into the ground that day. He said that more than ever before. He had been trying to drill it into her head that she needed to train her body more if she wished to become a hero, so he thought that beating her to high hell during her younger years would have helped her understand that. But all it took instead was her nearly getting killed by a villain, as well as training with the #1 hero All Might in order to get it through her thick skull that she needed to train her body as well as mind in order to become a hero. He could give three shits that she was quirkless, he knew that she had the drive to become a hero, but if anything, he was trying to get her to enter fights with him in order to get her to give him a reaction. But after she moved away near the end of middle school, he never got to apologize for his actions. Now he was taking his frustrations out on her and her new boyfriend that he never met before. But he felt challenged by Issei's presence, since the young man himself hadn't shown that he was particularly fond of him, but at the same time the boy felt like he was weak from his form and body type. Never had being punched in the face by Issei Hyoudou ever made him rethink his life choices before then. But now he knew he had some kind of superiority complex since he took his anger out on others, but at the same time he knew that he had an inferiority complex since he felt like Izumi was a threat to his ideal of being a hero. She thought that being a hero was about saving people with a smile like All Might, whilst he was thinking that being a hero was all about winning and making sure that you take out the villain before hostages are even thought of. It was a tough session with Hound Dog as he talked to the hero about his complexes as well as his issues with Izumi's past with him. The hero was clearly shocked when Katsuki had told the hero about his choices in the past and told said hero that he regretted them since he never got to say goodbye as well as apologize for his actions. He really can't now since his default emotion is anger. First punch things now before asking questions later. The hero looked at him with a concerned expression before setting him up with some anger management classes in order to kite down some of his anger by splitting it up into exercises to let it out. They also found out that the nitroglycerin also increases his hormones that increase his anger in his brain and was given some medication in order to decrease this number of hormones. They of course got it from Recovery Girl, but overall, everything was going as planned until Izumi had entered the fray with a problem of her own. She had informed the school about the past of her time in Issei's world, as well as the Izuku she had ran into who had won for all. How she was forced to kill the boy since he was too weak-willed to allow the quirk to be passed on to a new user of the quirk. How she had essentially consumed him in order to gain his quirk and replace her own quirk that was lost during the transformation to becoming a full-blooded dragon. She told them about her time in that world, as well as how Himiko Toga hadn't been brought back here yet and that she should be brought here soon. With her back in the fray, it will be chaos since she was completely unpredictable with her quirk, as well as where she could be at. She was really close to twice since the man was very much so like an older brother or father figure for her, and the man was lost in the Japanese islands. The rest of the League of Villains were lost in the country as they prepared to save their leader all for one from the clutches of the heroes. But as of right now he was preparing his mind to be fixed as he was taking the anger management classes at the moment. It has been 5 hours since he took the classes and he is tired as buck. He had been listening to the teacher of the course until he passed out from boredom. It was working though, to at least decrease the amount of anger he held towards others, as it was seen in classes. He was walking towards Heights Alliance when he was interrupted from his thought by Kirishima as the boy stood next to him. "How was your day, Bakubro?" the boy asked as Katsuki leaned in to kiss him. They were together, book everything that the world said, if they think that he'd get with Deku, then they are plain outright wrong. That was disgusting, and they know it. Anger management has been working, Kiri. I just hope that I get the help I need before I do something that I will extremely regret later on, Bakugo said as he walked into Heights Alliance. He saw Izumi and Issei sitting at the table and were about to leave when he spoke up. "Izumi," he said, as the girl stared at him with shock. What is it, Katsuki?" Izumi asked, concerned. "About the past, I want to tell you that I'm sorry for what I said and did. It was wrong. And I know that. I just hope that you can punch me now so that you can get all your anger for me out of your system, because after today I want to restart our friendship from the beginning," Katsuki said as he stared at her. "Why do you want me to punch you? I wouldn't do that in a million years based on our past. I forgive you, I just wanted for this to happen sooner rather than later. But we can start over as friends and build up to pet names, alright?" she asked with a smile. "Sure thing, nerd," Katsuki said, giving the girl a nuggie. "Well, since your relationship is fixed, at least we don't have to worry about you wishing to fight me anymore. I can finally relax without being told to fight you anymore," the boy cried out in happiness. "Well, I could always go for a spar, but I believe that you want to be with Izumi more," Katsuki said as he walked towards the elevator as the couple blushed. He escaped from the elevator as he looked to Kirishima as the boy looked at him with a knowing smile on his face. "See? Was that so hard to do?" the boy asked, chuckling as Katsuki swiped at the boy in anger. He really loved the boy, but he really needed to watch what he said around him. Training to become the big three. Izumi and her class were in their classroom as they prepared for their lessons after the events of the Overhaul fight. They had fought the big three who were the current best the school had to offer in terms of hero students, and they were prepared to have a new big three to become even better than the previous ones. Izumi had been training as hard as she could since she never wanted to stay on the sidelines, and now that she has her younger body and the powers of One for All again, she will be stronger than ever before with her draconic DNA. What happened back in Issei's homeworld was in the past as she made it her mission to forget about them, but the person who was brought with them hasn't even been brought back yet anyway. They were preparing for the test against the final exams for the year before they start on their final trails in their first year of high school. With Issei being with her, Izumi didn't have to worry about dealing with the loneliness of her home when she would return to it when the school year ended. But right now, she was beginning to train herself with her senpai Mirio Tagata. Otherwise known as Lemillion, the young man had lost his quirk in the battle against Overhaul as he was shot with a quirk erasing bullet and was training physically in order to get stronger. From her classmates she had learned that Shigaraki and the other villains hadn't been capable of gaining more supporters from the people they were against and had been killed by the Meta Liberation Army. But there was a serious problem. Shigaraki and Dabi hadn't been killed by the army and were now MIA. With that information, Izumi knew that those two wouldn't hold still in one place, and now that they knew that he had a giant on their side, the whole heroic society wouldn't wait until they defeated the Liberation Army to stop all villainy. Izumi had been planted on the ground harshly as she had been flipped by Uraraka again. The young woman with brown hair and chocolate brown eyes had been keeping her eye on Hyoudou for a while, and Izumi had been starting to get annoyed. "Uraraka-san, just tell him you like him already," Izumi said bluntly as the girl blushed profusely. But what about why your relationship with him?" Ichako asked as Izumi stared at her dumbly. "You're aware that he has a harem, right?" Izumi asked as she stared into her friend's eyes. "He does?" Uraraka asked. "Yup, I am the lead woman, but the other girl he had in his harem is in his old world. But I believe that we should get back into training," Izumi said, getting into a fighting stance. The two girls would fight one another, increasing their fighting styles when Ichako would start questioning Issei. "Is he a good person?" Ichako asked, throwing a right hook. "Yup, he just hides his perverted personality behind a mask of indifference. It took me a while to make sure that his mask over his true feelings wasn't his perversion. Trust me," Izumi said as she blocked the strike and swiped the girl's feet out from under her. Just as Ichako hit the mat, Izumi's face was near the girl's ear as she spoke. "He's really good in bed," Izumi said as she got back from the girl who was blushing madly about to pass out. With her out of commission, Izumi moved on to her next target, who just so happened to be staring at her interaction with a pure bliss look. "Mina," Izumi called out, and the girl jumped over to her. "What's up, Izumi?" Mina called out before blocking a punch. "Just what are you thinking?" telling Ichako not to pay attention to her feelings. Izumi asked as she blocked some kicks from her friend. "I haven't done anything of the sort. I've been trying to get a ship to sail. I know she likes Hyoudou, and that since you are approving of it, you are helping me with getting Project Isseiwhatif into the station," Mina called out, swiping her fist through the air and landing on a raised left leg of Izumi. Izumi thought about her words and learned that they were true, but she moved over away from the woman and saw her upperclassmen fighting Kirishima and Bakugo. "Can I fight, senpai?" Izumi asked both boys. "Sure thing, Izumi," Kirishima called out, smiling. "Sure, Deku, just make sure that you don't go crying to pervert about your broken femur," Katsuki said, walking off. "With all the tension between both boys, you'd think that one is taking the D and the other is giving it," Tagata said as Izumi blushed crimson. "See, can we fight already?" Izumi asked as her senpai nodded and laughed. "Just because you can tease your classmates about their love lives doesn't mean that you're immune to it," Tagata said, laughing as they clashed fists. "Sorry, just training to become one of the new big three is taking its toll on me since I want my friends to have their ships soar. Mina has been the one to watch them from afar, and since most of us has found our significant other, I want to help those remaining to get their own happy endings," Izumi said as she dodged a kick from Tagata. "Haha, I knew that you'd been different lately. So how was your time in the other dimension?" Tagata asked curiously. "It was great before we met the little sister of the current Satan of the underworld," Izumi said as she started to gain a cold look in her eyes. "From what I remember that she killed your unborn child, correct?" Tagata asked with a sad look. "Why yeah, I just want to forget what happened there, but I just can't stop having nightmares of Rias eating my child in front of my face," Izumi said as she stopped fighting and Tagata did the same. Hey look at me, Kohai," Tagata said, gaining Izumi's attention. "If you worry about it too much you won't ever recover. You just gotta smile. If you can make people smile and laugh, it will be worth it. If you keep looking back at it, you will never recover from that pain. Not saying that you will never be capable of doing so, just think about your future with Hyoudou and ask him for another child. If he gives you one, maybe you could learn how to be better with this one," Tagata said as Izumi nodded her head. It was late at night when Izumi went into her room to head to sleep when her bedroom door opened up and revealed Issei standing there. "Ice?" Izumi asked as the young man moved closer to her. "Hey, how's it been since I was gone?" Issei asked as he laid next to her. Izumi snuggled up to his body as she felt his inner heat consume her cold feeling. "It's been good, and I think I have convinced Ichako to confess to you. It's been getting annoying how she hasn't revealed her feelings toward you, so I gave her an incentive to do so," Izumi said smugly. "Well, I can't wait to see what she's got. If she can impress me in the room, then I will allow her," Issei said as he gained a perverted expression. "Hey Issei," Izumi said as she looked downward towards her stomach. "What's up?" Issei asked as he stared into her sad emerald eyes. Do you think we could try for another hatchling?" Izumi asked as she looked back into his own warm amber eyes. Well, so long as someone similar to Rias doesn't try and kill them, I don't see why not," Issei said, smiling at Izumi. Thank you, I haven't thought about it for a full month since we came back, but ever since the nightmares have been happening every night, I just want to have another hatchling," Izumi said, pulling Issei in for a deep kiss. "Just not tonight, alright? I have been working hard with a detective about my world for days and I just wish to have a good night's rest," Issei said as Izumi nodded her head. "Let's do it after we have a date this weekend," Izumi said as he nodded his head in assurance. They fell asleep together, unaware of the fact that Ichako had overheard their conversation that evening. "I will make sure that Izumi's child won't be killed again," Ichako mumbled to herself with determination. Final Exams Part 1. Izumi stood in front of her male counterpart from another timeline where he gave up on heroism. He told her to make sure that she keeps her love of saving people within her heart as it will never leave her. He had given up everything because of the fact that he lost to Shigaraki. The madman had left him alive in order to have someone to fight. Having someone who was as strong as you did wonders on making yourself stronger. But having someone who killed your friends and family keeping you around because of pity destroyed his mind. So he willingly gave up his own life in order to have one for all course through her veins once more, but the worst part about it, he unknowingly gave her his memories of the future he had to endure. All the pain and suffering, the loss of the one person he loved dearly at the hands of the villain he was tasked to defeat, crumbled away right in his arms as the villain watched him slowly lose his mind. Without any further prompting from him, Izumi moved towards him with her draconic form and opened her maw and consumed him whole as he smiled sadly. Izumi screamed as she woke up this morning by having a nightmare about the world she was in before coming back to her reality. She was breathing heavily as she remembered the events of what happened when she fought the male counterpart of herself who gave up on heroism. As soon as she screamed, Issei woke up from next to her as he held her close as she started to cry from the memory. Why did he have to let me eat him? Izumi asked as she cried softly in Issei's arms. The boy had been dealing with this since the event had happened to her in his old world, but this is the first time this happened since their return to her world. Hey, maybe you should see Hound Dog about that nightmare. He might be capable of helping you. Issei suggested as Izumi nodded her head. She was sorry for waking her boyfriend up that morning anyway, but he told her that it was fine and that she was having a nightmare and he just wishes for her to feel safe. A few hours later, Izumi is seen walking around the school as she searches for Hound Dog's office within the school. Arriving at the school counselor's office, Izumi knocks on the door and receives a call from the inside and opens the door. It revealed Hound Dog sitting in his chair looking over some notes from a most likely recent victim of his own that he dealt with. Midoriya, how has it been for you? The hero asked. I've been fine a little bit. Just needed to wrap my head with you on a dream I had last night. The young Drake said as she sat down on the couch. Well, far be it from me to send you away. Sit down and I will get you some tea. It seems you really need it for what you will be talking about. Hound Dog said, moving to get some tea. Could you get me some green tea? It really calms me down. Izumi asked as Hound Dog nodded his anthropomorphic head. A few minutes later, with some tea in their stomachs, Izumi regaled her memory of fighting her male counterpart from Issei's homeworld. I just never seen someone who gave up on life that badly. When I essentially ate him, he unknowingly gave me his memories of the events that happened from his version of our world. Izumi said as she shivered a bit at the recalling. Is there anything that could be causing this kind of event to happen? What happened after the event in Issei's homeworld happened to you? Hound Dog asked as Izumi explained everything about shutting down and hiding within her mind. It really got to her back then that killing another version of herself, even if they were male, really bucked up her mind to the point that she couldn't even function without help. Well, from what you are experiencing, it could be an ominous calling to action. We still haven't caught Shigaraki Tamura yet, so this might be telling you that you are running out of time. Hound Dog said as he stared at the notes he took. Okay, but are you all aware of the fact that Shigaraki is now teamed up with the Meta Liberation Army? Izumi asked as Hound Dog asked her a question in confusion. How did you know that was happening? Hound Dog asked as Izumi stared at him confused. What? Did he not accomplish this already? I thought this happened already with the amount of time me and Iri-chan were gone. Izumi asked confused even more. Izumi, Shigaraki is still on the run. He and some of his allies had just defeated the Meta Liberation Army just a few days ago. The HPSC had just found their base of operations. We are just trying to learn where the young man is as of right now. Hound Dog said as he stared at her in disbelief. I believe that he would be at Jaku Hospital. I don't know why, but that place kept coming to me in my dreams back when I was in Issei's homeworld. Izumi said as Hound Dog nodded his head. Thank you for the information. Does your counterpart have anything else he could assist us with in terms of his memories? Hound Dog asked, concerned now. He said that Shigaraki was getting upgraded with All for One's quirk. Izumi said as Hound Dog nodded his head. You stay within the walls of UA. We will keep you safe from any and all harm that potential villains will have for you. Hound Dog said as the timer rang out throughout the room. Well, I guess that's everything I needed to say. Thank you for everything, Hound Dog Sensei. Izumi said as the hero nodded his head and Izumi left the room. Izumi entered her classroom as she was closing in on the last lesson for the day before they were going to be reviewing the lessons before the new year starts. She entered her classroom as she searched for her seat and found Katsuki sitting in his own right in front of her old seat. Sitting down in it, she pulled out her notes from her last few lessons to do a small review so that she could remember them for the test tomorrow. Class was in session for about half an hour before Izumi felt something within her body start to claw its way out of her body. She was initially surprised by the power of the quirk coming in as she reined it in as hard as she could before it could be revealed. She was already a dragon, so the power she exuded was massively more powerful than what she ever had with a quirk. As soon as class was over, she was sitting outside near the small pond behind Heights Alliance dorms as she meditated over the new power she gained. Within the realm of One for All, Izumi stood before the previous bearers of the quirk and saw a man with a black leather jacket with a bald head and grey eyes moving towards her through the black mist. Hey, good job there on controlling my part of the quirk. You got a long way to go before you master the other quirks of One for All, but you are doing great. The best way to use my quirk is to quell your rage and use it to your advantage. Use your rage to power the quirk. But the most important part of my quirk is its name. Its name is Black Whip. It allowed me back in my prime to increase my mobility as well as capture villains who were too feisty. With my quirk it will assist you on your journey to become an even better hero. Use it well. The hero said as he moved away from her. By the way, my name is Dagoro Banjo and I am the 5th user of One for All. The man said before Izumi opened her eyes in the real world. She looked to her hands and released Black Whip as she saw the power of the move. It strained her left hand slightly, but she could use it in powerful bursts in order to catch villains by surprise. Her mind intelligently brought out. Izumi moved towards Heights Alliance dorm building when she noticed movement outside of her peripheral vision. She looked in that direction and soon found Aoyama standing there looking like he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Aoyama-kun. What are you doing out here? Izumi asked as the boy looked at her confused. I was searching for you. Hyoudou-sen was searching for you back at the dorms and I went out to find you. Aoyama said as he pulled out a piece of cheese. Thank you for the cheddar. Izumi said, chuckling lightly. Walking back to the dorms, Izumi saw Issei quite literally throwing the living room apart just to look for her. She laughed a little when she saw his face become happier to find her walking through the front doors of the dorms. You have no idea how much I missed you, Issei called out. Don't worry, Ice, I won't be going anywhere. Izumi said, hugging her mate. Well, might as well get some shut-eye, got some final exams tomorrow. Achako said as she walked off. Izumi and Issei followed after the girl and entered the elevator with her, but just as the girl was about to enter her room after getting off the elevator, Izumi grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her with her. Izumi W, what are you doing? Achako asked, blushing. I am getting you and Ice together whether you like it or not. Izumi said, with a mischievous smirk that was similar to the Cheshire Cat. Entering her room, Izumi laid herself on her bed as Issei followed suit, causing Achako to feel like a third wheel. Maybe I should go. She asked before Issei grabbed her hand and pulled her into the bed covers. Get some sleep with us, complain about it later. The boy said as the girl visibly steamed from her ears. Rolling over to face Izumi, Issei held Achako within his arms as the girl was completely red, resembling a strawberry, but with brown roots for hair. They fell asleep next to one another about an hour later, whilst Achako didn't want to mention it, but she felt something poking her rear before falling asleep. Final exams part 2. Izumi was walking into her final class of the day before they had the finals in the next week. She had been studying relentlessly in order to become better at making notes, as well as remembering certain lessons, in order to get answers correct. She might be a heroine in training, but she has to be perfect in most everything. The only thing she might lack a little in is self-protection. Her final class of the day was Algebra 1B, and she was having a hard time in learning the stuff since her brain was turning into mush and evaporate before she could even begin to remember the lesson. She was about to fall asleep from how boring the class was when a small piece of paper landed in her hand and she opened it up to see a picture of what she was about to do. Looking around the room, she soon found out that it was the teacher who gave her that paper as he sighed a little amusedly. Look, I know that Algebra 1B is kind of hard for some of you youngsters, but at least try to stay awake during the lesson. The man said as he gave her a lipless smile. She left the classroom with her homework for the day as she was preparing her mind for the inevitable mind-buckery that the final exams of the year would present for her. It wasn't until she was on her way back to the dorms when she gained a call from her teacher Izawa talking about a potential raid against the Metal Liberation Army that was happening in a few days. She entered the dorms and saw that some of her classmates had looks on their faces that were borderlining on somewhat fear. Is it true that we are going on part of a raid on the Paranormal Liberation Front? Achako asked, fearfully. I don't know, what I do know from Izawa-sensei, he said that I was going to be on a raid with the heroes in a few days. Izumi said as she calmed the girl down. Well, at least we will be able to have our final exams before the raid. Kirishima said as he smiled over at Kitsuki. We will beat those villain losers. I will show them where they belong in this world, the boy said arrogantly. Akin, you need to take this seriously. These people were heroes amongst our ranks and they have years of experience on the field as heroes before being seen as villains, Izumi said, angry. Well, from what our mission said, we are supposed to help the main force of heroes at the villain base of operations in order to take down as many members as possible. But some of us will be near Jaku Hospital in order to help evacuate the civilians from the city the hospital is within. Mina said as she looked at some of her classmates in concern. The day was nearing its end when they heard from Sato that dinner was completed and Issei made his way over to Izumi. Hey Izu, how was your morning and classes today? he asked as he gave her a chaste kiss. It was good, but I will be gone for a while in a few days. I don't know how long it will take, but it shouldn't take too long with how strong I am. Izumi said as she ate some of her food Sato made. The final exams were a written test that asked how one should act in terms of being a hero towards the civilians. Izumi was dead set on thinking the same way as All Might would, since the man was the best hero to look up to, since he was the best one out there. There were many other questions on the test like how one would become a quirkless hero, and she knew that some people out there would state that they shouldn't try and become heroes since they had nothing to fall back on in terms of quirks. Dear Izumi used her mind as she stated that a quirkless hero is possible, so long as the person trains physically as well as mentally, in order to pass the entrance exams, in order to get into a hero school. She was so invested into her final exams that she nearly missed the call about heading back to the dorms in order to get their hero suits on. As soon as she got the message she stood up in the middle of her class and headed out in order to see what this was going to be about. She also noticed how Shoto, Echako, Bakugo, and a few others in her class got up as well, but she had no idea why that was. She left the room after clearing up her test and turning it in, she headed out in order to find out what they needed to do. She and her classmates arrived in the dorms to find their homeroom teacher standing there as if he was waiting on their arrival. "Did you need something, Izawa-sensei?" Izumi asked as the man looked at her. "We will be raiding the Jaku hospital in order to catch All for One second in command Dr. Kaidai Garaki. Once we collect him as well as prevent Shigaraki from being completed in his assimilation of All for One into his body, you all will assist us in cleanup of the city," Izawa-sensei said. As the students in front of him looked at him confused, the man continued talking to them to inform them of their mission. "In terms of telling you all about this mission, I was tasked with not informing you all until the time frame of the raid on the Metal Liberation Army's base raid. Once they begin their raid, we will begin our raid on Jaku Hospital. I just want to let you all know that once you are there, make sure that you keep yourselves safe from any and all enemies who appear on the battlefield," Izawa said as he stared at his students. As they listened to their teacher about the raid plans, Izumi then noticed how Izawa-sensei talked about them not being informed before the raid even happens. "Izawa-sensei, why were we only told now instead of earlier so that we could prepare for it beforehand?" Izumi asked as everyone present then nodded their heads in agreement. "I was told to not inform you all since the HPSC doesn't trust anyone except those that are within their own little circle, as well as some heroes they trust. I was informed to not tell you about this before the raid since it was against the rules. But I decided that you all should know at least a couple days in advance, so prepare yourselves for when I call upon you again. But this time make sure that you all arrive earlier than this time. I know you all had final exams to do, but next time will be a matter of life and death," Izawa said as Izumi and the others nodded their heads. The man left the room as the small group looked at one another before Issei arrived downstairs and saw the group in their hero costumes. "Hey, is there a problem today?" he asked. Izumi looked at her boyfriend with a small smile on her face as she moved closer to him and led him up the stairs with Echako following close behind them. They needed to inform him about their mission in the next couple days so that he can be prepared for when they return either with one less of them or with a win in their books. Battle of Jaku. Izumi woke up that morning to a message from her homeroom teacher as the man told her that the mission is prepared for them to begin. Leaving her bedroom, she gets on her hero costume, the one where she saved Iri-chan in, and headed out to find her homeroom teacher. She found him outside looking at his phone as some other classmates arrived on the scene. Todoroki, Bakugo, Echako, Iida, Kota, and Manga were walking near her, as well as a third-year Nijire Hado. "Alright, you all are here now, so this is how things are going to go. Mirko-san will be at the lead with Endeavor as they storm the hospital as they try to take down any and all villains at the front. You 6 will be in the evacuation team with Burnin. You will be doing your best to evacuate the civilians near the hospital as we attack the base where All for One's doctor resides. Any villains that get near the place will be handled by either Burnin or Nijire, alright," Izawa said as Izumi nodded her head. As he nodded his head at them, he gave them all a hug as he told them the risks of this battle, causing the death of one or many of them. But other than that, they all headed to his car and moved out to Jaku Hospital in order to begin the evacuation effort. A few hours later they found themselves clearing out the civilians from the area as they are running around the place in a panic. Moving the civilians to the outskirts of the city as fast as possible, none of them had even known or heard that Mirko had went on the attack earlier than the plan stated. Izumi and Echako were clearing the people out when everything around them started to shake and tremble horribly. Holding on to one another as they searched for the people who were still in their homes, they attempted to get them to leave so that they could deal with an extremely dangerous villain, but the civilians told them to leave their families alone. Izumi would call her homeroom teacher in order to try and find out what was going on at the hospital when all she hears is static as well as grunts on the other side of the comms. Near the Paranormal Liberation Front's headquarters, the base there was about to be raided as Hawk stared at the doors where he was supposed to let the heroes inside of. He was about to open the door when a voice caught him in the act of what he was about to do. "Didn't think that you'd betray us like this." Turning around, Hawks could only see a massive torrent of blue flames as he dodged the attack swiftly. Outside the building, Cementus had started the deconstruction of the wall where Hawks was being attacked by Dobby of the League of Villains. As soon as it was destroyed, the young villain looked at the massive horde of heroes as he made his escape from the area as Hawks was in search of the villain known as Twice. But the hero students near the headquarters, Momoyae Rozu was seen setting up everything needed for the potential appearance of the giant Gigantomachia. She created giant sleeping pills that would put the giant to sleep for their mission to become a success. Her group was led by their teacher Midnight as she held them back from entering the fray with the heroes as they took the villains by surprise as they fought the villains completely. As the heroes stormed the base of operations, they were making arrests at a large rate and some of the villains started to flee the area in order to live for another day. One of them. But the gas mask moved towards where he knew where one of the groups would be in wait and underneath his mask he smirked at his plan. At the hospital, Mirko the rabbit heroine was seen bouncing off the walls as she moved towards the basement level of the hospital in order to find the mad doctor. Breaking down a door, she found massive tubes of purple liquid holding high-end Nomus that were fought by Endeavor back in April. She moved expertly around the place as she followed the doctor to where she would eventually find Shigaraki, at least that is what she planned before a small Nomu appeared protecting the doctor long enough for him to activate the high ends. "Well, this will be some fun," Mirko said as she smiled at her adversaries. But Endeavor he was rushing as fast as he could in order to catch up to Mirko since she would take advantage of the Nomu's presence to have a great fight. Not only that, but he wanted to make sure that he could prevent her from an early grave into the raid. They needed to prevent Shigaraki from waking up from his slumber of acclimating to the quirk call for one. It was about a few minutes after he entered the building before he found the stairs to the basement and he jumped down them in order to try and catch up to Mirko. Endeavor to erase her head. Mirko started the raid early. "I am going to back her up," Endeavor said, turning off his comms as he found the door that was broken down by Mirko. "You will not pass," the high-end said as Endeavor stared at his opponent. "You will not stop my assault," Endeavor said as he entered battle. With Mirko she was dodging and weaving through each and every attack the high-ends were launching at her. They managed to twist her arm to the point it was useless. But that didn't stop her from defeating one of them by ripping off its head with just her thighs before mocking the only flaw they have, their exposed brains, as she slammed her foot into it. Jumping around some more Nomu, she finally managed to catch up to the doctor as she had a manic smile on her face as she found him about to release Shigaraki. "What is going on? My every instinct is telling me to not allow him to wake up. Whatever, he might be dead after this," Mirko thought, seeing Shigaraki's tube as she launched a kick at the tube. Just as she was about to land the first strike against the tube, a mass of arms appeared and grabbed her body and tore off one of her legs in order to protect their master. "This won't stop me," Mirko called out as she ripped her leg off and launched one more attack that caused the tube to crack even more, but not enough to break. At this, Mirko looked a bit dismayed, but at this point she had run out of steam as she was pulled back into the mold of Nomu behind herself. It wasn't until a few moments later that Present Mick and X-Less arrived and broke the tube itself as well as found the quirk-destroying bullets and destroyed those as well. Knocking out the doctor, Present Mick called him out on being just as bad as the worst villain in history. But just as he was about to take the doctor away, he noticed how Shigaraki was moving about the place, but for some reason X-Less was nowhere to be seen. "One for all, where is it?" Shigaraki asked. Izumi was finishing evacuating the last of the civilians when she and her group had managed to catch up with the heroes who started the raid. Just as they were about to enter the building, Izumi got a massive headache that she had no idea about and noticed how the parts of the building were about to decay and grabbed as many people as she could and saved them from being decayed from the villain. Looking over the entire cityscape, she found that almost the entire city was completely decayed and destroyed, as if it wasn't there to begin with. Looking at Shigaraki, she glared at the man as she began her fight with the villain as he smirked at her. "Well, it's been a while, Deku, let's see if you can still keep up," Shigaraki called out as Endeavor attacked the villain. "You will not fight a student," he called out, releasing a blast at the villain. As the villain tanked the attack, Endeavor watched as Shigaraki began to heal from the wounds that were afflicted to him from the attack. "Wow, you really were trying to completely disintegrate me with your flames. But sadly, for you I don't have to worry about those kinds of debuffs," Shigaraki said as he sent a massive wave of air at the hero, sending him away. Izumi flew towards her opponent as she clashed fists with him and grabbed his wrists with her palms. Clashing their foreheads together, they stared at one another with a pure hatred that seemed to go on for years. "I will put an end to your reign, Shigaraki, and I will save you from all for one," Izumi said as Shigaraki gained a confused look. Back at the headquarters of the Paranormal Liberation Front, Class 1A and 1B were teaming up in order to take down Gigantomachia as the giant had come out of the basement, screaming about something similar to All for One. Midnight had been split apart from the group as they took on the giant alone, as Dobby of the League of Villains tried his best to not split apart from using his quirk too much. Some of the other League members were there with the exception of Twice, as the man had died in the arms of Toga as she cried over his death. As it turned out, Hawks had managed to find Twice before the man could activate Dead Man's Parade in order to help the villains. With Midnight she was facing off a group of villains as she tossed her whip around the place with a smirk on her face. "These villains will kill you, hero, and they will have fun with your body afterward," the masked villain said as he told his henchmen to attack. Unknown to them, Midnight had a second-in-command nearby as he appeared donning a red armor as he kept her back covered. "The might of the Red Dragon Emperor has been forgotten in this world. I will show why you mortals shall fear me," a masculine voice called out angrily. But Cementus and the rest of the heroes and hero students who were allowed to join the raid on the building, they were cuffing the villains, as well as leaving some behind, in order to help their classmates. "Don't worry about us, you two. You must help your classmates take down a giant. Go, we got everything handled here," Fat Gum said as he smirked at the multiple students under his wing. Running off, Fat Gum smiled happily as his students Red Riot and Manifest had taken off in order to catch the massive villain in the distance. "You got this, your generation will be even stronger than ours," the man thought to himself before grabbing a villain who was attempting to escape through crawling away. "And where do you think you're going?" Fat Gum asked, smiling. At the evacuation area, Achako, Todoroki, Bakugo and Koda were collecting the last few civilians when the area around them started to decay. Grabbing everyone she could, Achako cancelled their gravity from the earth and pulled them away from the ground as it completely decayed in front of their eyes. Everyone looked ahead at the hospital as they soon found a massive crater there with a massive amount of air being blown about from a huge battle taking place. "We need to assist Deku-chan," Achako called out as Bakugo grunted and Todoroki nodded. Making their way, they ran as fast as they could in order to help their friend and old friend in defeating the worst villain to ever grace their world from being born. In the crater, all the heroes had noticed that they weren't decayed and looked to the air and found Izumi floating in the air with draconic wings that were emerald green. "You didn't have those, I thought you were quirkless before getting one for all," Shigaraki called out. Speeding towards the villain after placing the heroes on the ground safely, Izumi launched attack after attack at the slightly older villain. "I won't ever allow you to kill another person ever again, Shigaraki. You caused one of my counterparts to give up. I won't allow you to do the same to me," Izumi said as she launched attack after attack on the young man faster than he could even react. The part that was making his situation worse was that she was doing more damage to him before he could regenerate the damage she had done completely. Shigaraki was being completely overwhelmed by the speed and power of Izumi, but was slowly becoming adjusted to the speed of the fight. As soon as the fight was reaching its peak, Izumi landed an attack where Shigaraki landed his hand on Izumi's face, attempting to steal one for all from her without decaying her. As she stared at the small hole on Shigaraki's hand, everything went black for her and everything became a black void. Unknown to either of them, Aizawa was erasing decay from Shigaraki and preventing his student from being decayed into nothing. Within the realm of One for All, Izumi found herself on her stomach and looking up, she found the other holders of One for All standing around her in a protective stance. "Hello brother, previous wielders of One for All, I am here to finally take it back," All for One said as his form was mutated beyond comprehension as if he was trying to assimilate Shigaraki. Izumi looked at Nana as the woman stood up after taking her hand off her head as she moved forward in front of the villains. "One for All will not be stolen from you, and it never will. No matter how hard you try to take the quirk, even with pure anger, it won't help. We decide whether or not to leave young Midoriya," First said. As All for One looked at them, he stared at Tamura for a second before Izumi's words reverberated all over the world of One for All and All for One. "Tamura, you are not the pawn of All for One, you are your own person. I can see the child that only wants a friend. I can save you, you just got to reach out and I can save you," Izumi screamed in her head. As the entire world began to crumble around them, All for One scattered as he pulled himself and Tamura out of the mini-world and returned to the outside world. Izumi kicked the man's hand off her face as she began to pummel the villain as hard as she could. She never noticed how her friends were making their presence known on the battlefield. The fate of Jaku, Izumi and Shigaraki were fighting one another in the air as they launched blow after blow onto the other. Shigaraki was doing everything in his power in order to take One for All away from Izumi, whilst the girl was doing her hardest to make sure that she could stop Shigaraki from killing her and everyone. The wind being tossed around in the sky was no joke as both powerhouses were going at it, leaving the heroes and hero students on the ground, looking like they were second fiddle to this fight. "I feel like we would just be interfering with the fight right now," Achako said as she looked at her classmates. "I don't care about what Deku's doing up there, I'm going to help her," Katsuki screamed out, jumping into the air. Now with two people fighting Shigaraki, everyone around saw how Izumi and Kitsuki were really helping the other out in fighting such a villain. With Izumi taking most of the focus of the villain, Kitsuki was being allowed to land devastating blows onto the villain in order to twiddle down his regeneration quirk that was healing any damage dealt to him. As the other heroes managed to get some of the injured ones out of the area in order to clear the splash zone of the fight, nobody ever noticed that a giant figure was on its way in the distance in the opposite direction of the battle. With Izumi and Kitsuki's full attention on the villain, Shigaraki had been trying to kill Bakugo, but hadn't been capable of doing so, since Izumi would jump in the way and tank the blast, as if it was nothing. "What happened to you? You were not this durable back in the USJ," Shigaraki called out angrily. "Well, let's just say I got some upgrades," Izumi said, as she revealed her draconic wings to the villain. "You gained another quirk. How?" Shigaraki asked, as Izumi zoomed towards the villain appearing right in front of him. "This isn't a quirk, this is what happened when I disappeared from this world," Izumi said, punching the villain in the face, sending him to the ground. While the Battle of Jakku was nearing its end, over with the hero students, they were trying to stop Gigantomachia from escaping them, as Momo had created the giant sleep-inducing pills for the giant to consume. Nobody knew how much of these pills were needed, but they needed to do this before they could lose the giant again. But some of Class 1B in the fight, keeping Gigantomachia busy with being sunken into the ground, the other members of each sister class had been fighting what remained of the Paranormal Liberation Front, which just so happened to be the remaining members of the League of Villains and a member of the MLA. With everyone's focus on the entirety of the giant man in front of them, nobody even noticed that someone with red armor was slowly moving closer to the giant with his gauntlet at full power. And as soon as the giant had managed to escape from his sinking prison, he got up, grabbed the league members, and just as he was about to run off in search of his master, a massive blow was done to the nape of the giant's neck, causing him to fall to the ground unconscious. Everyone, surprised by how the giant seemingly was defeated by running out of stamina, looked to the air to find red armor hovering in the air with wings on its back. "It's Issei," Mina called out, as everyone saw Midnight appear behind them. "Hello class, it's been a while since I was fighting some men in need of punishment. But that is beside the point. We need to get Gigantomachia into custody and prevent him from escaping," Midnight called out, as the remaining members of the League and the MLA were running into the forest without everyone noticing. Just as they were about to get the giant under control and custody of the police, a voice called out from his radio, waking the giant up. "Wake up Machia, Tamura needs your assistance." A very malicious and very powerful voice that was extremely familiar to everyone spoke out. "All for 01?" Mina asked, completely scared. Just as Momo had placed the final touches on Gigantomachia's back, the giant stood up, breaking every single wrapping the young girl had placed on him, and ran towards the Jakku hospital area. As Issei landed on the ground near Midnight, the woman looked at him with a very fearful face. "On a scale of 1 to 10, how much damage would Gigantomachia do on his way to Jakku?" she asked. "About a 100 out of 10. We need to stop him," Issei called out, flying off in order to stop the giant himself. Back at the hospital, Shigaraki had tried to decay the ground, as Izumi had managed to grab the villain's hands before they touched the ground. The villain pulled out a bullet that survived the Shihaseikai raid, and he tried to put it in her skin, only to find that the bullet couldn't pierce her skin. "Sorry, but my skin is more tough than you realize. Also, thanks for giving me the idea," Izumi said, as she grabbed the bullet and stabbed it into Tamura's neck as the bullet did its job on him. Tamura was beginning to feel all for one and decay beginning to disappear as he was feeling weaker and weaker, but at the same time, he felt his mind becoming more and more free. And within the small amount of time that was given to him, he placed a hand over his head to test the waters of whether or not he would decay, but nothing happened. I can't believe that master's plan failed so horribly," Shigaraki called out seemingly happily. As Izumi stood back from the supervillain, she stared into his eyes before noticing something odd about his behavior. Are you okay mentally?" Izumi asked as she stepped closer to the villain. "What are you talking about?" Shigaraki asked. "Just looking through your eyes, I can see that there is something present that wasn't there before," Izumi said as she sat Shigaraki down on the ground, surprising all the heroes and hero students around herself. When Shigaraki was sat down on the ground, she sat down in front of him as she placed her forehead over his own. It was here that everything around them was turned to a dark black abyss as Tamura looked around the space and found that there were multiple vestiges staring down at him, most notably his grandmother Nana Shimura. "Tenko Shimura, you have been living underneath All for One's tutelage for most of your life," the first vestige said as he stared at the boy. "I can't believe that one of our own users' children were used against the power of us. It was horrible for that bastard to do," the third vestige said. As the other vestiges talked about what they should do with Tenko, a new vestige appeared in the realm. This one resembling a young boy with emerald green eyes and light green and black rooted hair. But there was something off about this one, he seemed so dead. As if every single light in his eyes were taken from him and crushed by everything that could ever happen to him. It was this boy who moved up to him with a passion in his walk, but at the same time it was calm, calculated. It wasn't long before the boy was right in front of him, and Tomura Tenko couldn't understand why it seemed like he met this boy before. Not only that, but he seemed similar to Izumi. "Who are you? I feel like I met you before, but you're similar to Izumi," Tomura Tenko asked, curiously. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I am the 9th inheritor of One for All from a dimension where All for One managed to take over your mind and kill everyone I held dear," Izuku said as he stared at Tomura Tenko. The young man's eyes widened as he stared at the boy with a small amount of fear, as well as guilt. As Izuku told him about what All for One did to his body had the bullet not consumed his entire quirk factors, then he would have been consumed by the vestige that was All for One. Tomura Tenko didn't like that. "Why are you telling me this?" Tomura Tenko asked, confused. "In my world I wanted to see if I could save the young boy who was deep inside the confines of All for One's control. But I failed because while I was trying to save you, All for One killed everyone I loved and cared for. And he fought me to a standstill and managed to defeat me all on his own. I wouldn't give him the quirk, so he placed me at his side as his pet. I couldn't get stronger in order to defeat him since he had your quirk of decay underneath his fingertips. I failed my mission to kill him and prevent him from taking over the world, and I am here to show you what happened in that world," Izuku said as he placed his fingers and hands over the temples of the young villain's head. Destroyed cities were everywhere in the distance. A young man was sitting on the ground near a man in a suit and tie, the worst part he was wearing Tomura's body. The man looked down at him as he gave him a sickening smile on his face before placing his hand on the young boy's head as he ruffled the hair. "It's been too long since I had a pet that was under my complete control. And not only that, but you seem terribly similar to my long-lost brother Izuku Midoriya," the villain said as he chuckled at Izuku's fear-ridden face. "Someone will save me, I know they will," a defiant Izuku said as the villain chuckled. "Oh, you poor young man. Nobody's coming to save you. You want to know why?" All for One Shigaraki asked. "What are you talking about?" Izuku asked, incredibly concerned. "If you are talking about all of your friends and family, then they can't come after you. After all, before stopping you from defeating Tomura all those years ago, I killed each and every one of your friends before saving your mother for last," the villain said before using his gloop quirk to teleport Inko over to them. "Izuku, what is going on? What is that man doing with you?" Inko called out worriedly. "Ah, Miss Midoriya. What a pleasant surprise to have you here. I'm sorry to say this, but your services in the needs of your son are not required," All for One Shigaraki said as he pointed a hand to the woman. "You know they say that a mother's fury is never able to be called, but that time was the only time I thought that my mother was the most powerful being on the planet. She had used her quirk in just the right time to take out each and every organ that was within All for One Shigaraki's body within seconds. But even that wasn't enough when the man just regenerated each organ back into place and killed her without a second thought. He punctured a hole through her head as she fell to the ground, blood squirting out of said hole as her eyes were glazed over dead. Izuku pulled out from the grip of the villain as he pulled his mother close to his chest as he cried over her dead body. It was a complete nightmare for him to ever think that his mother would be killed by the one villain in history to ever know about anything. But even then, all the rage building up inside him since the beginning of the year of fighting the bastard caused Izuku's rage to come out completely and start fighting the villain once more. But he failed just like the last time as All for One kept bringing innocent lives into the fight in order to keep Izuku off of him. And with him riding out Izuku's fury, it was a foregone conclusion that Izuku had lost to the villain once again. It was hardwired into his blood to save people and be kind to others, but after the death of his mother, he just couldn't wish to become a hero anymore. His only reason for living in that world was completely gone, and his only chance to finally die just wouldn't let him. "You see, Shigaraki, that is what would happen if you continued your path of villainy," Izuku said as he sat down next to the villain. "What do you think I should do now? If even I was killed by Master, what should I do?" Shigaraki asked as Izuku stared at him with an extremely sad smile. "Turn yourself in. You will be capable of getting some charges dropped because of your heritage being completely abusive to you to the point of you using your quirk to get out of that life. But then there was the fact that All for One groomed you to be his successor, but he didn't actually think of you as his successor. He thought of you as another body for him to inhabit so that he could keep his life going forever," Izuku said as they were brought out of the vestige world. As Shigaraki and Izumi exited the realm of the vestiges, she looked down at the ground before moving away from him a few feet and threw up what was inside her stomach. "Tea that never gets better," she said, holding her stomach. "Why are you trying to save me?" Shigaraki asked. "Because everybody deserves at least a second chance. No matter who or where they were raised," Izumi said as she smiled at the villain. "So if I turn myself in now, I would be capable of leaving prison on parole. I would be able to play video games again." Shigaraki Tenko asked, tears brimming his eyes. Yes, I wholeheartedly believe that you could be on the streets as soon as the courts believe that you are under the grooming effects of All for One and that you could change. I want to give you that second. Izumi couldn't finish her words when Gigantamachiya had arrived on the scene. Master Shigaraki, I have come as you asked, the giant called out as Izumi got into a fighting stance. Gigantamachiya, you don't have to save me anymore. Shigaraki said as he stood up. The giant looked at the young man confused as he stood up to look at him. I command you, as your master, to turn yourself into the police. Shigaraki said as the giant nodded as he sat down. That was when the police and everyone else moved in to place them in police custody as Izumi walked over to Detective Tsukauchi in order to place a favor to him. Naamasa-kun, Izumi called out as the man noticed her. Walking over to the girl, she stood in front of him with a determined look on her face as he stopped. What do you need, Midoriya-san? Naamasa asked. I want to give Shigaraki another shot of being free, Izumi said as everyone around herself looked at her as if she was crazy. Are you bucking crazy, Izumi? Did you hit your head when he slammed you to the ground earlier? Katsuki screamed at her, shaking her body at the same time. Jay, just hear me out please, Izumi called out, being dizzy. Well, what do you want me to do? Naamasa asked. I want you to try and help him get into a mental institution. Izumi said as the man looked at her like she was crazy. What do you mean by that? Naamasa asked. Well, if you technically think about it, he could be tried for insanity due to circumstance. Izumi said as she explained the events of how Tenko Shigaraki was living up till now. Well, I could do that plea bargain for him, but if he becomes evil again, you will be held responsible for his actions. The man said as Izumi nodded her head. I can't promise that I can get him that plea bargain as well as into the mental institute, but I can be sure as hell try. Keep yourself in the green, little lady. Naamasa said, walking away. As everyone looked at the devastation of the area, nobody ever thought to look high in the air as there was someone looking down at all of them. She had long green hair and a face that was filled with a smile and some slight lust as she searched for someone important. Now where is Issei? She asked as she watched as Izumi was moved away from the battlefield. I found Izumi, but now where is my hubby, Issei? The girl asked as she noticed a red streak making its way over to the area of Izumi. There he is, she called out, flying towards the red streak. Side story: Island trip. Izumi and Issei was walking towards the plane that would be taking them towards the place of their choosing for their date with Ichako. The girl had been pensive about how she would be bringing the other girl, who was more of a cinnamon roll of the class, into the idea of joining her in Issei's harem. But now that Ichako had accepted the idea of coming to Island with the two lovebirds, the duo was literally antsy in terms of making the date as perfect for the skittish girl as possible. They were waiting on Ichako to arrive in the plane and were placing their gear inside of the plane when the said girl made it into the plane itself. Looking at the girl, they noticed how she looked really adorable in her frilly pink dress, as Issei was reminded of a certain blonde devil girl back from his world. That dress reminds me of Ravel-chan. I wonder how she is doing. Issei mumbled softly. Izumi smiled at him as she rubbed his back as they sat in their seats after helping Ichako set her stuff in the plane securely. But that they took off towards the island in the sky in order to make sure that they could meet up with All Might and one of his friends. Izumi was supposed to go deal with that whilst Issei and Ichako went out on that date that they really needed to do. It was a few hours for the flight to arrive to the island in the sky, but Izumi decided to inform her mentor that she was on her way there and would arrive in a couple of hours. Receiving a notification from the man stating that he will wait for her at the airport, she placed her phone away as she nuzzled into Ichako's shoulder to sleep. 3 hours later, the trio's plane had arrived on Island as they got their things and headed towards the airport. Once arriving in the airport area, Izumi noticed All Might standing all by his lonesome with a young woman with blonde hair. That's me, guys, meet you all later at the apartment, Izumi said, running towards the hero and his niece. Ichako watched as Izumi left her and Issei as the young man brought her to their apartment on the island until they had to return to UA again. They went out to explore the island as they had their nice little date with one another and had actually met some friends from the school there as well. With Izumi, she and All Might had met the hero's best friend's daughter, who Izumi found out was quirkless like her before she gained All Might's quirk. Because of this, they became extremely close friends because of this information. She and the hero himself were walking through a door only to see that the man's niece had ran into the room to get her father. Izumi had exchanged numbers with the girl as she learned the young woman's name was Melissa Shield. And was disappointed to hear that the woman would only enter a relationship with a woman and not enter a harem like she was in. Shame. But other than that, the young woman had vowed to make her some gear for her quirk as well as draconic abilities so that she doesn't have to get new gear every other day. It was here that she met the man behind the young woman and met the man who became All Might's first unofficial sidekick. David, it's been so long, All Might said, happily pulling the shorter man into a hug. It's been too long, Tashi. Who is this little one? Is she your daughter? David asked curiously. And nope, I am just his successor. Izumi said as he stared at her in shock. You gave it to her? He asked the hero. Yes David, she showed me her exemplary will as well as heart to become the new symbol of peace. With her in charge of the next generation of heroes and heroines, I feel like my legacy of being the symbol of peace will fade into obscurity. The hero said, looking at the sun setting in the distance. David stared at the hero in awe before shaking his head and moving to make a call a bit of a ways away from the group. After yelling at the phone for a few minutes, he hung up and called security to be on high alert when it reaches the next day's events. Moving back to see confused faces looking at him, he told them about the plan he was making in order to make sure that Tashi could remain as the symbol of peace for just a bit longer. As Melissa was deeply betrayed by her father's actions, she could also see why he was doing it. All Might had been making few and far fewer appearances around the entirety of Japan and wouldn't be capable of being a hero for much longer. More so now since Izumi held his quirk within her body. Miss Midoriya, you can have my word that my family will always support you and any successor you gain in the future. David said as Izumi smiled at him. Don't worry about me David. I'm going to be the last successor to the quirk anyway. Izumi said, causing everyone barring All Might to stare at her. What do you mean? David asked as Izumi explained the problem with the quirk and its uses. So that means that you will be the last wielder of the quirk. That means it is all that much more necessary to make sure you survive the battle against All for One. David said as Melissa nodded her head. Whilst Izumi was telling the shields about the problems with her quirk, Issei and Ichako were having a blast as they were at the hero run of the island. Both were using their powers in order to get a better score than the others within the arena as they were laughing all the way. It was here that they forgot who the Ms. Issei was around pulled Ichako close to him as he placed his face in her hair. I will never get over the smell you have Ichako. It's really good, what kind of shampoo do you use? He asked as the girl blushed from their contact. I only use coconut oil as well as regular shampoo. She said, blushing a little as Issei had pecked her on the cheek. Bakugo saw this as he got furious and moved closer to the young man as he threatened him. What did I tell you, you bastard, why are you trying to have an affair with another woman? Bakugo growled. You know, I am building a harem for myself. She is the leading person after all. Not to mention she was the one who told me to go after Ichako myself. So I don't see the problem in getting more than one partner. Issei said, flippantly. Bakugo looked away from the boy as he walked away with a scowl on his face. He wanted to see if there was anything he could do to make sure that the boy could be left behind by Izumi. Issei and Ichako then moved over to the restaurant nearby in order to get a bite to eat after letting loose some energy they had stored from the flight over to the island. They were sitting at the table when Izumi had arrived with a new person as they sat down next to one another. Hey Izumi, who is the beautiful lady? He asked as he tried to put his best moves on the woman. Don't try your moves on me dude, I am a lesbian. Melissa said as she giggled at his exasperated face. Me and Mel were talking about what kind of gear she could make for me. Since no matter what May could try and make, they would be broken within the first and second uses. Izumi explained as Melissa became intrigued on whoever this May girl was. Who is this May? She asked as Izumi talked to her. May is a young girl in the first years of our school. She made my hero costume upgrades as I was in my earlier months of the first year, as she made my gauntlets as well as other things before I disappeared and fell into Issei's world. Izumi explained as Melissa was beginning to like this woman more. Anything else I should be worried about? Melissa asked, giggling. May likes to refer to her creations as babies, other than that, she can make any item that comes to her mind and either make it blow up or work. It's usually a 50-50 chance of either happening. Ichako said, giggling. They received their food and drinks from one of their classmates before heading towards the apartment in order to get some shut-eye since the ball is the next night. But they really wanted to get some rest since they had been moving about and with Melissa bidding them farewell, the trio had fallen asleep next to one another with Ichako in the middle. Return of a harem member returning to normality. Izumi was standing near Issei as they heard a familiar voice above their position and they look to the sky as they find a green-haired beauty with devil wings floating in the sky. The green-haired woman landed on the ground as she gave both teens a smirk on her face as she walked over to both of them with a sway of her hips. The heroes around them all gathered around the trio as they were prepared to fight another villain but were completely taken by surprise when the woman grabbed Issei's face and placed him in a passionate kiss. As soon as her kiss was done with the boy, she looked over at Izumi as she grabbed the girl's chin and heightened it to be just near her own as she gave the girl a kiss as well as she also grabbed the young heroine's chest, a little kneading a bit. Hyoudou, could you introduce us to whoever this woman is? Aizawa asked as he stared at the two kissing individuals. That is my second girlfriend from my world. Her name is highschooldxdhero, one of the descendants of the original devil Asmodeus. She was the one who helped both me and Izumi get acclimated to the devil climate of my world. Issei informed as the teacher sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Is there anyone else we should be preparing for an appearance of? Izawa asked, as the kiss between both girls had ended. Nobody in particular, but I apologize if there is anyone new from Ice's world that comes here. Highschooldxdhero said, smiling at the sleep-deprived man. Well, now that the problem is fixed, we need to repair any and all damage from the fight against Shigaraki. Izawa said, as he went to go help with disaster relief. Oh, I can fix all of this mess for you all. Highschoold said, as Izawa looked at her. What do you mean by that? The man asked, cautiously. I have magic, Izumi has magic, and Issei-chan has magic. We can fix everything from the battle and be just a bit deprived of magic for a couple of days. Highschoold said, as Izumi and Issei nodded. Well, go knock yourselves out. You'd be perfect for the job of disaster relief. Izawa said, moving to a broken-down vehicle and laid himself on the seats and fell asleep. I guess Izawa-sensei had finally had enough of being awake for one day. Izumi giggled, as Issei and Highschoold had all laughed at the man's expense. Literally 4 hours after the battle had subsided, the trio had made their way back towards their classmates and soon-to-be classmates for Highschoold. The buildings around themselves had been returned back to their original form, as if nothing had happened in the area. The trio were walking up to the other classmates of Izumi as they noticed that Katsuki was talking to Kirishima as the young man had finally arrived on what was supposed to be a battlefield. I can't believe that Shigaraki would do that to himself. What a way to go, he had such a cool quirk as well. Kirishima said as he slapped Katsuki's left shoulder. Hey Kaken. Izumi said as the young man turned around to see Izumi with another woman and Issei next to both of them. So what is this, a new harem member? Katsuki grouched. She was the harem partner before Ichako, so technically, no. Izumi asked as she looked at her boyfriend. Don't look at me, I don't know about how this goes, I just go out and find a girl I like and try it out with you girls. Issei said, looking away blushing at the ears. Disaster relief has been taken care of, is this the Highschoold I heard about a few months ago? Ichako asked as she rounded up the last of her supplies. Yeah, Highschoold meet Ichako meet Highschoold. Highschoold is the descendant of Asmodeus Astaroth and she is coincidentally his granddaughter by a few 100,000 years. Issei said, trying to put a number to how old the devil really was. Nice try on guessing my age Issei-chan, but I am about your age anyway. The devil said as she giggled. The group were cleaning up a small park of the debris that was tossed around when their teacher walked over to them with an announcement. Alright students, now that this mess has been dealt with and all for one's final nail is in its coffin, I can say for certain that there won't be any more villain attacks on the school for a very long time. Welcome to your second year, or whatever. The man said, before dragging the class and Highschoold, who just phased out of his capture gear and floated over him towards the bus. We will be heading back to UA and starting on the curriculum of the second years, after that you can do whatever you want. You have more than enough experience to become heroes at this point, so just have fun. Izawa said, as the class smiled as they got on. The bus had taken off towards the school, as Highschoold had sat outside of Ichako and Issei, as Izumi was leaned over against the young man's chest. She had a long day of fighting as well as painful moments against Shigaraki, and would like to rest in order to forget them. It wasn't until a few hours later that she woke up inside her room with Highschoold and Ichako sleeping next to her as Issei was standing up near the door. Getting up from the bed, she moved behind him as they both went to the living room of Heights Alliance as they looked at the dorms for the last time. This will be the last time we are all here within this set of dorms. I wonder who the first years of the next generation will be. Izumi wondered out loud. Don't worry about it, we will make sure that the first years won't be having a lot of issues in terms of protection. They have 2 literal dragons and an entire class with more than a few years' worth of experience, all smacked right into 1 year altogether. You'll be fine. Issei said as Izumi nodded her head. Moving outside they laid out on the yard of the school grounds and looked at the sky which was completely cleared up for their night coincidentally. Staring up at the sky they had been watching the stars when they heard movement from around the area behind them. Looking at the doors they found Highschoold moving towards them with a slight stumble in her step as Izumi looked at Issei. Please tell me you didn't screw her while I was asleep. Izumi asked as Issei looked away whistling. Is that why I was feeling slightly woozy, she asked, laughing. Issei looked away more as his face blushed as Izumi just laughed at his expense as she looked down at her own stomach. I hope if I have another hatchling inside me that nobody will attempt to kill them again. If I am pregnant again Issei, what gender do you think our hatchling will be? Izumi asked as Highschoold finally arrived and sat down next to them. I think it will be either a girl or a boy. I don't care about whether they are a boy or girl though. So long as they are safe and happy, I'm happy. The young man said, staring out at the sky. Well, at least I know it takes more than what he managed to do to my hussy last night to get me pregnant. It will take at least a few hundred more times for him to be able to get me pregnant. Highschoold said, as if jinxing herself. Please don't say that, Hikage, you might jinx yourself into being pregnant with your words alone. Izumi said, as the trio had started to laugh at the joke itself. Deep in the expanse of the underworld, a young girl was standing in front of Michiel with a grin on her face. She was covered in blood as well as taking the form of a close ally of Michiel. She had long white wings that numbered 8 in total. She had golden blue eyes that shone with her power, and not only that, but the body of the original was on the ground with blood coming from her mouth as she gargled on the blood coming from her stomach. I can't wait to make myself consume your blood. I wonder how much love I can give you, the girl using the body of her previous opponent against Michiel as a massive explosion appeared in the area consuming all 3 people. Island trip battle for Island. Waking up the next morning, Izumi and Issei found Ichako sleeping soundly in between them both as they smiled at her. Giving her a kiss on the forehead, they got up from the bed as they both took a shower with one another as they cleaned themselves up from the earlier day. Today there was going to be a party where All Might was going to be celebrated for being the #1 hero of the world for his 49th consecutive year. So they had to find some exclusive clothes that they could wear and not look like they were poor compared to the other scientists as well as rich people who came to the island or lived there. Izumi changed into her crop top as well as shorts as she moved out of the apartment they were inside of as she moved towards the outside portion of Island. Making her way to the outer layer of the island near the beach, she started some stretches as she warmed up her body in order to go on a run. It was early in the morning since she had been wanting to get some light training in before the rest of the day was done. As she began to run around the island, she never noticed how some of the scientists were watching as she ran around the place, looking as if she was meat. Within a few minutes of running around the island, she found someone else running around the island, and as she got closer to the person, she found out that it was Melissa. "Hey Melissa," Izumi called out as the girl looked behind her to find Izumi in a crop top. Izumi, you're aware of the laws here about clothing, right?" Melissa asked, concerned as Izumi looked at her confused. "What are you talking about? Is wearing a crop top to go out on a run that bad?" Izumi asked as Melissa stared at her with a deadpan stare. "You are essentially telling all the men here that you are available to be buck 3 ways till Sunday," Melissa said as she shook her head in a slight fondness. "The people here should already know that I'm taken. I have been hanging out with Issei and holding his arm for a majority of the time I have been here," Izumi said as Melissa thought about it. "I guess you're right. Well, let's finish our run and then get a dress for the ball later tonight," Melissa said as Izumi nodded as they continued their morning run. After taking a second shower in order to get all the stench from her body as well as sweat, Izumi had left the apartment with Ichako as they went to get some dresses for themselves. "So where is the other girls?" Ichako asked as Izumi looked at her. "The other girls are training themselves in the hero arena. I haven't seen them all day, but we need to get a dress for the ball today, Ichako-chan," Izumi said, and that was when another girl showed up. "Hey Ichako-chan," a blunt feminine voice called out. Looking over, they found it was Tsuyu as she jogged over to the girls as they were walking, and as soon as she caught up with them, she started to walk at their pace. "It's been a while, hasn't it, Tsu?" Izumi asked as the frog girl nodded. "It's been a long while since you talked to both me and Ichako at the same time, Ribbit," the girl said, croaking happily. Izumi petted the girl's head as she smiled at her, and as they continued walking around the place, they found the store where they were going to get their clothes for the ball that evening. "Alright, find colors that match you, alright?" Ichako asked as both girls with her plus Melissa, who walked up to them without them knowing, nodded. Izumi walked around the establishment as she looked over the dresses as she tried to find out which one looked best on her. She eventually found the one. It was white with a flower pattern over her lower stomach area as well as really accentuated her eyes as it had a red trim. It really brought out the colors of her hair and eyes as well as showed off her slim as well as curvy body. After nodding to herself in happiness, she walked over to the man at the register as she bought the dress with her money. She sat outside the building as she waited for the other girls when she saw movement coming in her direction, and looking up, she saw her mentor smiling down at her. "Young Midoriya, it's been some time since I came to check up on you. How have you been?" All Might asked as he smiled down at her and sat down. "It's been going fine. Me and the girls that we could bring with us had bought some dresses in order to wear them at the gala," Izumi said as the man nodded. "I will be in costume, so I won't be capable of talking to you during the gala. I can only hope that the gala doesn't last as long as it normally does," All Might said, sighing. Nodding her head, she looked out at the view of the ocean down below the island in the sky as she smiled at the view. "I can't believe that I've been on this island for 2 whole days now. I've accomplished every single dream that I've ever had growing up," Izumi said with a goofy smile on her face. "You haven't become a hero yet, Midoriya Shonen," All Might said, chuckling. "Don't say that I was trying to have a heartfelt moment, now you ruined it," Izumi laughed before pouting. "I apologize for ruining the moment, just wanted to see you smile a bit more," the man said before laughing loudly. "All Might, I just wanted to let you know that I view you as more than a mentor. Izumi said, as she looked at the still rising sun. What do you mean by that? All Might asked curiously. Ever since the day you saved me from the slime villain incident, then trained me with One for All, and then finally training me harder than ever before I got sucked into another world, I always viewed you as the father I never had. Izumi said, as she looked at the hero with small tears brimming at the edges of her eyes. All Might then reached over and pulled the girl into a side hug as the two looked over the horizon as they waited for the day to come to a near end for the gala to begin. Once it was evening, the girls had gotten together in order to place their clothes on and give the boys a reason to look at them. Meanwhile, Izumi was still thinking about what she told All Might earlier that day whilst waiting for the other girls to come out of the clothing store. My time has been lowering to the point where I can't exactly hide who I became after that fight against the villain who put me in this state. I can only hope that the younger generation don't take pity on me when my quirk officially leaves me and joins you. All Might said as he stared off into the ocean below. Now Izumi was thinking about her future as the next in line to become the #1 hero and how she had to take up his mantle as the future symbol of peace. She shook herself out of her reverie as she put her dress on and began to head out towards the other students of her class in order to find Issei. Arriving at the gala, they found the boys in tuxedos as they were looking handsome for some of the other girls. For Izumi and Ichako, Issei was looking really handsome in his red-lined suit and tie that made him look even more manly, as Kirishima would say. She and Ichako walked over to the young man as he saw their outfits and chuckled at how Izumi hugged him close to her. Never thought I would say this, Ice, but you look really good in a suit and tie. Izumi said, nuzzling his cheek. Ichako came to the other side of Issei as she pouted at Izumi for holding one of his arms and she started making comments to get Issei to look at her. Izumi giggled to herself at how Ichako was being jealous of her when she heard movement coming in their direction and found that Melissa had arrived. Hey girls, Issei. What is going on? Melissa asked as Izumi told her what had happened. Well, let's just have fun, my dad should be here soon to start the celebration. Melissa said as she went over to dance with Yaoi Rozu. Izumi smiled at the whole entire place before she caught more movement coming from the doors as she pulled some of her classmates and Issei into a spot away from what was about to happen. The doors to the place broke down as the lights went out as villains had caught All Might off guard and tied him up to the chandelier on the ceiling. Hands up in the air everyone and don't move a muscle, one of the villains called out as he taped All Might's mouth shut. With everything that was happening on the bottom floor, David Shield and his partner in crime had been seen running towards the top of the building. Are you sure about this, David? We should really just leave it in the vault, the second scientist that David trusted asked. Don't worry, those villains are paid actors. They won't hurt anyone. This attack will only allow me to deliver the device I made to him so that he can still continue being the symbol of peace. David said as they continued running towards his office. A look of determination on his face as he kept his thoughts to himself as he kept an oddly really close eye on his subordinate. He hasn't been asking why villains are attacking. He's up to something. David thought to himself. When they arrived in the main room where the device was kept under lock and key, David walked over to the vault as he opened it with his biometric scanner. As soon as he entered the room, he grabbed the tool that the entire board of directors told him to keep away from any and all people. It was a threat in and of itself since it was created by him and could be used to make villains stronger just as much as it could strengthen the heroes. As soon as David exited the room, he found himself being held at gunpoint as his subordinate had stared at him with an expression of cold laughter. I can't believe that you actually thought that the villains you had me hire were fake. Now hand it over so I can give it to my handler. The subordinate said as David stared at him with mock shock as well as concern. But the others in the bottom of the stairs, Izumi and the rest of her classmates, started their ascension up the stairs in order to get the power back on. Melissa was the only one who could get the power back on as well as send the security bots on the villains since they were being attacked. Floor after floor, the group had been fighting robots that were turned against the populace of Island until they reached the 150th floor. Melissa and I will head over to the power station. Go ahead and find David Shield, Issei called out as Izumi nodded and grabbed some of her classmates. As soon as both parties went their separate ways, Issei and Melissa had managed to find the security office and managed to open the door and shut it completely. With Melissa working on the power as well as the building security, she had to make sure that everything she did was perfect since she needed to know what her father was doing. Izumi and the others had arrived at the 200th floor as they heard an argument between what was believed to be David Shield as well as someone else. Slamming the door open, Izumi ran into the room to find David Shield at gunpoint and holding a device in his hands. Izumi, knowing that something was wrong with the situation, tried to stealthily come up behind the man with a gun since he was still talking. But just as she was about to knock him out, a metal platform appeared from the ground, sending her up into the ceiling of the room. You need to keep an eye on your back, you dumbass. You were about to get yourself neutralized. The new villain said as he had a wolf-like appearance. Just from this experience alone, Izumi knew about the man's quirk since he had a physical mutation of a wolf and could control metal surfaces. Breaking free from her small prison quite easily, she landed on the ground as she activated her quirk and launched herself towards the villain. Caught off guard from her breaking free of what he thought would be a prison for her, he was punched out of the building and onto the helicopter pad as she managed to knock out the subordinate of David's shield. Although that didn't save the man from being shot in the shoulder by said subordinate as Izumi knocked the gun out of the man's hand, causing it to fire. Once she got the man restrained, she looked over at David as he began to stop the bleeding with one of his creations. Izumi noticed how the device was leaving the area as if on its own. Grabbing it before it could be taken, Izumi gave it to David as he nodded at her, and she left the room to take on the villain. "I am Wolfram and I will not be defeated by a damn brat," the villain introduced himself. "Well, face it, puppy lover, I am going to defeat you and take you in," Izumi said as she activated her quirk. "Well, it seems like Master All for One was correct, you really do have the quirk he so desires," Wolfram said as he activated his metallic quirk. Controlling every piece of metal surfaces in the area, he sent them towards Izumi as she casually punched through each and every attack like it was nothing. It wasn't much longer before All Might had broken through the helipad and grabbed the villain and slammed him down into the metallic ground as the villain sent the hero flying towards the ground once more. "I gotta say, that hero is really stupid to place my face on the ground like that," Wolfram said, chuckling, but was confused when Izumi started chuckling as well. "I know, right, he may be my mentor, but he may be an idiot at times," Izumi said as the villain laughed out loud. "I know that we are enemies, but having a good laugh is never not good," Wolfram said as he attacked her again as she casually deflected each attack. With his quirk being essentially defeated at each and every turn, Wolfram had been soundly defeated with not much effort, except for the fact that Izumi had gotten a few cuts and bruises from each of his attacks. It wasn't much longer before All Might returned to the rooftop and found Wolfram bound up with some plastic wires as he was no longer a threat. "I can't believe that I let him send me through multiple layers of metal. I really need to get some pointers on how to analyze villains," the hero said. "You'll get there, All Might Sensei," Izumi said, smiling. "Your dress is ruined," the hero said as Izumi nodded. "It's fine, we can get it washed back at UA. I just want to go back home and rest," Izumi said, sighing in relief. All Might nodded as well as they headed down the stairs with a damn near unconscious David's shield as they brought him to the paramedics. All Might got his talk with the man as he told the inventor about his faults, as well as the fact that All Might wouldn't be capable of using the device in a couple months' time before he lost his quirk anyway. Izumi and All Might entered the plane as they left the island, waiting for something new to happen on their way back home. Unaware of the fact that whilst they were gone, Tamura Shigaraki had gathered himself an army to protect him whilst he became a second All for One. Coming New Year, Izumi had been sleeping in her room with Issei and Ichako with their girlfriend Hikage. They had been spending a lot of time together within the dorm since the new year as about to begin since the war against the villains. She left her room as she walked over to the kitchen in the common rooms as she started to make some breakfast for herself and her small family. She was in the middle of making breakfast when Issei and Ichako entered the kitchen and hugged her from behind. "Morning, Aizu," Issei said as Ichako nodded her head into Izumi's side. "Morning, honey, Acha. I'm in the middle of making breakfast, so sit down at the table and wait for your food," Izumi said as she kissed both of them on the lips. As soon as they both left the spot they were at behind her, Izumi had placed her hand idly on her stomach as she thought about what was happening to her. As soon as she finished breakfast, she started feeling something building up inside her stomach that caused her to place her hands over her mouth and run off. Ichako and Issei noticed how she was running towards the bathrooms and followed after her in order to make sure that she was alright. When they arrived at the bathroom door, they entered inside of it to find Izumi throwing up inside the toilet as she retched her insides into the toilet bowl. Issei and Ichako had moved over and started to rub the girl's back as they tried to make sure that she knew their presence was there and calmed her down a little bit. "Are you alright, Izumi? I sure hope you're fine," Ichako said as she rubbed Izumi's upper back. "I've only seen Izumi like this once before. We need to take her to recovery girl after breakfast," Issei said as Ichako looked at him weirdly. "What do you mean by that?" she asked as Issei looked at her deadpanning. "What do you think it means?" "She's probably pregnant," Issei said as Izumi finally stopped retching her stomach into the toilet. I've been feeling like this for the last couple of days. Just never as bad as this the last time it happened," Izumi said as she cleaned out her mouth. Issei and Ichako brought Izumi towards the kitchen and they all ate breakfast as Hikage entered the kitchen to see that her breakfast was made as well before sitting next to the trio. "What's wrong?" she asked as they pointed to Izumi's stomach as an answer. She's probably showing signs of pregnancy. I can't wait to see the little hatchling," Hikage said as she moaned happily. The quartet had arrived inside the school as they moved towards the nurse's office in order to get to the school's nurse. Entering the room after moving about the place for about 12 minutes, they saw the old woman working on something in her desk as she mumbled to herself. "Mrs. Shuzenji-san, Izumi needs your help," Issei said, as Chio looked over. "What is wrong with the lass?" she asked as she got to work on Izumi. "We have reason to believe that Izumi is pregnant," Achako said, as Recovery Girl looked at the young man next to them. "You are aware that this means that she will need to spend more time with the child than her schoolwork, correct?" Recovery Girl asked, as Issei nodded his head. "I will make sure that she gets her homework when the baby comes. Although she will be laying an egg instead of birthing like a human," Issei said, as Recovery Girl pulled out a notebook. "I see. What else does a mother dragon do when she is having her birthing process?" she asked, as she looked over at Issei. "Well, she tries to make her nest inside her room for the egg to stay warm within the nest. She will also be staying near the egg in order to protect it from predators," Issei said, as Recovery Girl wrote it down in her notebook. "Is there anything else we should do in order to prevent the child's death or God forbid its kidnapping?" Recovery Girl asked, as Issei looked over at Izumi as she lied on the bed. "Izumi needs to be near the egg at all times. The last time she took her eyes off of it, someone who didn't like her had taken the egg and eaten its contents in front of her," Issei said, as he glared angrily at the ground. "I happen to believe that it would place her in a depressive episode, correct?" Recovery Girl asked as Issei nodded. "She was extremely depressed to the point that she killed the person who took her child before it was born," Issei explained as Hikage had looked away in sadness. "I see. Well, with this information there is only one person who will attempt to do that, and if it happens you have full reign on their life," Recovery Girl said, as they looked at her confused. "There has been a perverted student that has been the bane of our existence since he cannot be found guilty of his perverted actions. He has touched girls of other classes and blackmailed them into doing things for them. He must be taken care of, but for some reason he is protected by our school system because of the simple fact that his parents are on the board of directors," Recovery Girl said, as Izumi looked at Issei. "I'm going to kill him if he decides to come to my room to see my eggs. He will not get close to me or my eggs without him being blasted to death by fire," Izumi said, as she gained an angered look in her eyes. "Don't worry, Izumi, we will make sure that you don't have to worry about him," Achako said, as she looked at Hikage as she nodded as well. "Well, with that out of the way, let me get the ultrasound machine in order to see if we can see the egg or child within Izumi," Recovery Girl said, as she left the room to get said machine. As if on K, a diminutive boy walked over to the room as if he was summoned as he looked at the people inside the room. "Hey, can someone tell me where to find the gym gamma again? I can't seem to find it," the boy said, as Issei looked at him. "Are you telling the truth?" The boy glared at the perverted boy. "Yes, I'm not doing anything bad," the boy said, as he kept his thoughts to himself. "Well, the gym is down the hall to the right, and once you get outside you should walk for about a kilometer before reaching Gym Gamma," Issei said, as the boy thanked him before leaving. As the boy left, he never really kept his voice quiet as he spoke about making Izumi his bitch later on that week. Recovery Girl moved back into the room to find the group looking disgusted as well as slightly fearful for Izumi as she held her stomach. "Well, I can guess that Mineta-san had arrived," she asked, as everyone looked at her and nodded. "Well, let's get this started," the old woman said, as they got to use the ultrasound machine. Looking through the machine they saw that there wasn't just one egg like last time, there was actually 2 eggs within Izumi's womb being formed. "Well, it seems like you are going to be having twins. I can only hope that you can raise them both to be the best they can be later on in life," Recovery Girl said, as she had the machine take an imager 3 before giving the images to the group. Standing inside the dorms they were moving slowly since Izumi was getting more and more tired within the building at the moment. She was having trouble walking since she was getting more tired since the day they checked her out with Recovery Girl. Izumi had spent the last few days clearing up their room in order to create a nest that was worthy for their soon-to-be-born eggs. She had also managed to decrease the size of her draconic form in order to make it more bearable to walk inside her room and lay her eggs in peace. The day was coming for when she could lay her eggs, and Izumi was paying more attention to the area outside her bedroom as she overheard Mineta walking about her room outside of it. She was beginning to get more and more furious about his actions being deliberate as she was about to enter the stage of laying her eggs when he finally knocked on his door. Izumi kept as far away from her bedroom door as she heard the sounds of scuffling at her bedroom door. It seems like the boy was going to do something more pervasive than before anything in the past as he was lockpicking her door. Izumi knew that Issei and Achako hiding on the ceiling was a good idea since they would be capable of seeing what the boy would do to reach Izumi. As he finally lockpicked the door and opened it, he looked into the room and leered at the form on the bed. Izumi was literally hours away from laying as the boy made his way over to the bed as he pulled out a device as he chuckled darkly. "With this device I could become the mate for Izumi, and I will be able to finally lose my V-card," the boy said, as he breathed heavily. Climbing up to the bed he found Izumi sitting in a corner of her bed as she breathed heavily as she laid on her side without pants and only wearing panties. The boy was about to get closer when a capture scarf had found its way around him as he looked over at the teacher with disdain, as well as being caught like a deer in headlights. Mineta Minoru, you are hereby expelled for the solicited act of breaking and entering into your classmate's room with nefarious deeds planned. Especially with a device made by the support course to get a woman to do any desire you wish. You are also hereby arrested for breaking and entering, as well as attempted sexual assault. You will not be remembered here at this school as a hero, but as a young villain in the making. The teacher said, as he dragged the boy out of the room before looking at the ceiling. Thank you for informing me about this, Uraraka and Hyoudou. You will get extra credit from me in a later assignment. Aizawa said, as he left them to their devices and closed the door allowing them to lock it. As they dropped to the ground, they called Recovery Girl, since the laying was about to begin, and within the next 15 minutes, the old woman was right at the door knocking. Opening the door, she entered and used a dimmer switch in order to dim the lighting in the room so that she could make notes on how this kind of action happens for dragons. I've always wanted to see how a dragon had laid its offspring. She mumbled to herself as she watched Izumi begin the process of laying her eggs. She watched as Izumi's folds began to spread apart as her innards had moved about into her sides as it revealed a massive hole within her body as a weird white egg was pushed slowly towards the exit. They sat there watching the event as Izumi was breathing heavily as she was focusing all her energy in laying her eggs. Issei and Ichako had sat next to her face as they rubbed their hands in her hair as they made sure that Izumi was okay mentally in the process. Within the first few moments the first egg was dropped onto the bed as Recovery Girl moved into the bathroom to wash the egg and dry it off from Izumi's fluids. Placing the egg next to Izumi's chest, the girl curled up a little bit before moving on to the birthing of another egg that was well on its way. This one egg though was causing her some issues as it was seemingly too big for her to drop out, so Recovery Girl looked at Izumi as the girl nodded towards her as the old woman began to help the coaxing out of the egg. With another hour of laying, the next egg was released from Izumi's body as she breathed heavily for the actions of birthing. Recovery went into the bathroom in order to clean the egg as well as make sure that it was healthy before returning it dried to Izumi as she curled herself around the egg protectively. Alright, that is everything I needed to know. I will make sure to pass this knowledge over to other doctors in order to make sure that if we have any more dragons coming into our world who have wanted nothing more to do than mate and lay eggs to help the dragons reproduce safely. Recovery Girl said as she left the room feeling giddy. Deep within the underworld we can find the remains of Himiko Toga as she lays on the ground without her arms as she struggles to get up from the ground as a man with crimson red hair moved up. I can't believe that you gave the angels the hardest problems with how weak you were compared to us. I will not make that same mistake against you. The crimson-haired devil said as he blasted Himiko into nothingness. My name is Surzich's Lucifer and your death will bring the supernatural to safety as well as prosperity. The man said before disappearing from the alleyway where the remains of Himiko Toga was just a bunch of ashes. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.